A billionaire fell in love at first sight with a late bridesmaid, unaware that she was hiding a big secret. What he discovers next changes their lives forever. Hello, viewer. Thanks for joining us. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. The sun shone brightly upon Martha's vineyard that late morning, lending a gentle sparkle to the rolling waves. Rows of wooden chairs lined an immaculate lawn overlooking the sea, where guests had already gathered for Rachel Morgan's wedding ceremony. Even in such a postcard setting, Alexander Morgan found himself restless. At 38, he was a composed man with sharp features, dark hair neatly combed back, and an intense gaze that hinted at both confidence and detachment. Despite his immense wealth and prominent family name, he had never quite grown comfortable with grand social events like this one. He stood beside his cousin, the groom, making polite small talk but feeling a subtle disconnection from the festive atmosphere. Rachel's wedding was a significant affair, and Alexander knew how important it was to show support. Still, something weighed on him, an indefinable sense of longing, as though a piece of his life puzzle was missing. A slight commotion drew his attention toward the end of the rows of seats. Several bridesmaids had begun walking down the aisle in lavender dresses, their expressions serene, when a woman in the same color gown hurried around the corner. Her cheeks were flushed, and she seemed to be catching her breath as she tried to smooth the wrinkles in her dress. The ceremony was about to begin, but no one had expected a delay from any member of the bridal party. Alexander's gaze lingered on this latecomer. She was different, slightly disheveled, with strands of dark brown hair escaping an otherwise elegant updo. She carried herself with grace despite appearing clearly frazzled. When her eyes briefly locked with his, an involuntary jolt of intrigue shot through him. He couldn't explain why, but there was an instant connection, as though an invisible string had been tied between them in that fleeting moment. Quietly taking her place as a bridesmaid, Grace Sullivan, age 34, tried to calm her racing heart. She had spent the last 12 hours at Boston Children's Hospital, working through the night to stabilize a young patient in critical condition. The traffic to Martha's vineyard had been worse than expected, and she was mortified to be late. Still, she knew she had done everything possible for her patient, and she refused to regret prioritizing the child's life over timely attendance. Perspiration dampened the edge of her hairline, but she forced a steady smile. Standing near the altar, Rachel offered Grace a reassuring nod. Even though it was her own wedding day, Rachel understood Grace's dedication to her profession. She had, after all, handpicked her dear friend to be one of her bridesmaids precisely because of her heart for others. While soft music began, Grace tried to regain her composure. She sensed someone watching her and turned slightly, her eyes meeting Alexander's. A soft warmth bloomed in her chest, a sensation so unexpected it nearly made her forget where she was. As the ceremony proceeded, Alexander found it hard to pay attention to the exchange of vows. His focus kept drifting back to the mysterious bridesmaid, who was now standing serenely at the bride's side, her hands folded over a small bouquet of flowers. He couldn't help but notice tiny details, how she exhaled with relief when the couple finally said, "I do," or how her shoulders relaxed as the tension slipped away, even though her face still showed signs of deep fatigue. Something about her spoke to him, an intriguing mix of vulnerability and resolve. After the ceremony, guests moved to the adjacent lawn, where a lavish reception was set. String lights hung overhead, casting a romantic glow on the festivities. Waiters passed hors d'oeuvres and champagne as the bride and groom greeted attendees. Alexander took a moment to survey the crowd, searching discreetly for Grace among the sea of pastel dresses. He found her near the back, adjusting the strap of her dress and speaking quietly to one of the other bridesmaids. Deciding to approach, He navigated through clusters of guests until he stood just a few feet away. When she noticed him, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her features before she managed a polite smile. Up close, he could see the faint, dark circles under her eyes, the subtle trembling in her posture that hinted at exhaustion. "Are you all right?" he asked, his deep voice softened with genuine concern. Grace hesitated before replying. "I'm fine. Thank you for asking. Just a long night at work." He nodded, sensing there was more to her story. "I'm Alexander Morgan," he said, offering a hand. She took it gently. "Grace Sullivan." For a moment, they simply stared at each other in silence, as if sharing a secret neither had spoken aloud. Then the clamor of wedding toasts nearby broke their moment. The best man clinked a glass, prompting all eyes to focus on the center of the reception. Reluctantly, Alexander stepped back. "It was nice to meet you, Grace," he said, his voice laced with curiosity. "I hope we get a chance to talk again." He left her with a quiet smile, unaware that in those few seconds a spark had ignited, one destined to unravel a past neither of them knew they shared. The reception buzzed with life. The gentle hum of the ocean provided a constant backdrop to the lively chatter of wedding guests, sipping champagne and savoring gourmet canapés. Meanwhile, the newlyweds, Rachel and her husband, basked in the warmth of well-wishers clustered around them. Alexander drifted away from the crowd, occasionally greeting old acquaintances, but mostly allowing the festivities to flow without him at the center. He glanced around until he spotted Grace again. She was lingering on the fringes of the party, clutching her phone while wearing a thoughtful expression. Though she attempted to look engaged in the conversation around her, her eyes kept drifting down to the device. Abruptly, it lit up with a call, prompting her to excuse herself from the small group. A flicker of concern tugged at Alexander's mind. Why did she appear so on edge, even in a celebratory setting? He took a step in her direction but halted, uncertain if it was appropriate to follow. Instead, he found himself watching from a distance as she walked behind a line of tall hedges for privacy. Moments later, he decided he couldn't ignore the feeling that something might be wrong. He rounded the hedge to find her talking in hushed, urgent tones. She ended the call, looking noticeably distressed. Quickly composing herself, she offered a faint smile when she realized she wasn't alone. "I'm sorry," Grace said softly, clearing her throat. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Alexander shook his head. "You seemed worried. Is everything all right?" Her gaze lowered. I received a call from the hospital. A boy I've been treating had some complications. They managed it, but they wanted me to be aware that he might need additional procedures." "You're a doctor?" he asked, connecting the dots. "Pediatrician," she explained, her voice warm but tinged with concern. "I was on call late last night. I barely made it to the ceremony on time, and I suppose I'm still a bit unsettled." She sighed, pressing the heel of her hand against her brow. "I didn't mean to draw attention. I know this is supposed to be a happy occasion." Alexander offered a reassuring tilt of his head. "No need to apologize. You were just doing your job. Saving lives seems more important than arriving precisely on schedule." Her smile grew slightly more genuine. "Thanks. Believe me, the bride will forgive me, but my conscience keeps reminding me I should have been here earlier. Yet, my patients always come first." He studied her face for a moment, noticing the way her features softened when she spoke of her work. "Rachel spoke highly of you before, but I never realized you were so dedicated. It sounds like your job is more than just a profession, it's a calling." She nodded, a proud glimmer in her eye. "That's exactly how it feels. When a child's well-being is on the line, I can't just clock out and leave everything behind. I made a vow to be there for them no matter what. A breeze picked up, rustling the leaves above them. The faint melody of the wedding band echoed from the reception area. For a moment, they lingered in companionable silence. Alexander finally spoke, his voice gentle. "If you need to go, don't let us keep you." I'm sure the bride and groom would understand. Grace shook her head. "The hospital isn't asking me to return right away. They're just alerting me in case my expertise is needed again. For now, I can stay." She hesitated, searching his face. "I appreciate you checking on me. Sometimes, these events can feel overwhelming, especially when you've got other worries on your mind." Something in her honesty pulled at Alexander's heart. He saw genuine compassion in her eyes, a quality that sparkled far more brilliantly than the diamonds adorning many of the guests. "I'm glad you can stay," he said quietly. "I'd like to talk more, maybe over a glass of wine, if you're up for it." A slight hesitation crossed her features, as if she weighed the idea against the worry still lingering in her thoughts. Ultimately, she gave a small nod. "That would be nice, actually. Maybe it'll help me relax and enjoy the celebration." They returned to the reception together. Couples danced under the soft glow of lanterns. Waiters bustled about with trays of delicate pastries, and laughter bubbled from every corner of the lawn. In the midst of that lively scene, Alexander and Grace found a quieter moment by a makeshift bar. He motioned to the bartender, who poured 2 glasses of white wine. Their conversation started with cordial inquiries, where they grew up, how they each knew Rachel, but soon delved deeper. They discovered shared values and a similar passion for helping others, even though their worlds seemed light years apart in terms of wealth and status. While the evening continued around them, both felt a gentle tug that this was no ordinary chance encounter. And neither suspected that, just beneath the surface, a secret from Grace's past was quietly binding their lives in a way neither could have imagined. The morning after the wedding, Grace found herself at Boston Children's Hospital, pacing the corridor outside her young patient's room. The night staff had paged her for a consult, and she had left the post-wedding brunch earlier than planned. Though she managed to treat the situation effectively, her mind kept drifting back to thoughts of Alexander. A delicate sense of intrigue remained, but it warred with a growing fear that she was treading into dangerous emotional territory. Inside the room, the child rested peacefully, the worst of the crisis having passed. Satisfied with the results, Grace stepped out to find Dr. Joseph Carter, her closest friend and a trusted colleague, waiting by the nurse's station. Tall and bespectacled, with a warm demeanor, he offered a gentle grin. "You're quite the hero today," he quipped, "saving the day at a wedding, then rushing here to save a kid's mourning." "When do you sleep?" Grace smiled wearily. "I'll sleep when I'm certain everything is stable. Besides, you've seen me function on 4 hours of rest plenty of times." They moved down the hall, out of earshot of patients and families. Dr. Carter rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I heard you attended a rather lavish wedding. Word on the grapevine is that the bride's cousin is a big-time philanthropist." Grace felt her heart skip. She hoped no one had already begun gossiping about her lateness or her interactions with Alexander. "Yes, Alexander Morgan. He's well known, but he's surprisingly humble. I had a chance to talk to him a bit." "Ah," Joseph said, raising an eyebrow. "And how did that go?" "Fine," Grace replied, attempting casualness. "We mostly chatted about the wedding and my work. He was kind, actually, more concerned about my patient than the fact that I almost missed the ceremony." Joseph studied her face. "Well, that's certainly refreshing. Too many wealthy donors only see the glamour of fundraising galas." If he's genuinely interested in the realities of pediatric care, that could mean good news for the hospital. He lowered his voice conspiratorially. And good news for you, perhaps. You've been buried in your work for ages. Maybe it's time you let someone in. Grace's posture stiffened. A swirl of emotions churned in her chest. Excitement, curiosity, and apprehension. You know my stance. I'm not looking to complicate my life with a serious relationship right now, especially not with a billionaire who lives in a completely different world. Joseph raised both hands in a gesture of surrender. I'm not forcing anything. But if your instincts are telling you there's something there, maybe don't ignore them out of fear. She paused, recalling the way Alexander's expression lit up with genuine concern when she'd explained her patient's condition. That memory was enough to stir her heart, yet doubts anchored her to reality. There's a lot he doesn't know about me. Things that might change his entire view. Joseph gave a sympathetic nod. We all have our secrets, Grace. If it's important, you'll find a way to share it when the time is right. She clenched her jaw, remembering the donation that had saved her sister Lily's life 15 years ago, money that came from the Morgan Institute. At the time, the identity of the donor had been kept strictly anonymous. Only later did Grace discover the Morgan name linked to the philanthropic organization. She had never sought to meet them, feeling a strange mixture of gratitude and vulnerability. Now, fate seemed to be throwing her onto a path with Alexander Morgan, and it felt like a collision course she wasn't sure she could handle. Wiping her slightly damp palms on her lab coat, she changed the subject. Anyway, I'd better check in with Dr. Harding about next week's schedule. Joseph smiled kindly. Go ahead, and Grace, don't let fear hold you back from something good. She responded with a brief, appreciative nod, then continued down the hall, her mind a tangle of hope and unease. Could a man like Alexander truly see her for who she was, a dedicated pediatrician with scars from a family crisis? Or would he one day learn about the massive donation that saved Lily and assume Grace had orchestrated some elaborate attempt to pay him back through feigned affection? That uncertainty tightened in her chest like a knot. Stepping into the elevator, she reminded herself that for now she would remain cautious. There was too much at stake: her family's privacy, her professional reputation, and her own heart. Until she was sure it wouldn't compromise the life she had worked so hard to build, she would keep her secrets to herself. But her resolve shook slightly when she exited onto the administration floor and saw a message on her phone, a text from Alexander, politely asking if she would like to have coffee sometime. Her heart fluttered, and she realized that doubt, however strong, might not be enough to stop her from wanting to know him better. Alexander Morgan glanced out the large window of his penthouse office in downtown Boston, where glass towers met the harbor's edge. He leaned against the sill, recalling the hospital tours he had occasionally taken in his role as director of the Morgan Institute, always from a respectable distance. Now, as his mind roamed back to Grace Sullivan, he felt an unusual pull to step closer, to truly understand what went on inside those hospital walls. Moments later, his phone vibrated. He turned to see his lawyer and longtime friend, Peter Caldwell, had sent him a text. Meeting at 2 p.m. with the Philanthropic Advisory Board. Alexander sighed, placing the phone aside. The advisory board had been pushing for a major donation to a children's hospital. Normally, he would have weighed the pros and cons clinically. But now, the idea carried a personal resonance he hadn't anticipated. A sharp knock on the door broke his reverie. In walked Donovan Morgan, Alexander's uncle, a silver-haired man with a stern jaw and an air of entitlement. Although Donovan held no official stake in the institute, he was known for voicing opinions about how the family fortune should be used. "Your assistant said you had a moment." Donovan stated, eyeing the pristine office. "I wanted to catch you before your next meeting." Alexander motioned for him to sit. "What's on your mind?" With a critical gaze, Donovan observed the modern decor and the numerous philanthropic awards lining the shelves. "I heard you might be directing another hefty sum toward pediatric research," he said, barely disguising his disapproval. "Don't you think you've done enough in that sector?" Alexander crossed his arms. "We've done a lot, yes. But there's still more need. Children's hospitals are underfunded, and pediatric care has unique requirements." "That's true," Donovan conceded. "But you've got your name on so many wings already. The Morgan Institute can't solve the world's problems alone." "It's not about solving everything," Alexander replied evenly. "It's about doing our part, especially where we can make a real difference. Pediatric care changes the course of an entire life." Donovan's gaze sharpened. "And is this concern purely philanthropic, or is there someone driving your interest? Rumor has it you were quite taken by a bridesmaid at the wedding, a Dr. Grace Sullivan." Alexander stiffened. He wasn't surprised. Gossip traveled fast in his social circle. "I won't deny we've spoken. She's a passionate pediatrician doing remarkable work. Whether or not we expand our hospital funding has nothing to do with personal feelings." Donovan smirked, but didn't push further. "Just be careful," he muttered. "The Morgan name attracts all sorts of people with ulterior motives." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Thank you for your concern, but I can handle my personal affairs." With a curt nod, Donovan left, leaving a heavy air in his wake. Alexander felt the stirrings of frustration, a reminder of how meddlesome his uncle could be. Still, he couldn't entirely dismiss Donovan's warning. As a billionaire, he'd seen more than a few attempted deceptions. Yet from the short time he'd spent with Grace, she seemed earnest, driven by compassion rather than greed. He arrived at the philanthropic board meeting feeling more resolved than ever. Seated around a sleek conference table were key advisors, including Peter Caldwell, who greeted Alexander with a knowing smile. The conversation quickly focused on the possibility of making a sizable grant to improve children's emergency services across Massachusetts. Peter flipped through some documents. "If we allocate these funds, we could partner with local hospitals to expand critical care wards. It's a long-term commitment, but it might be the next logical step for the Institute's philanthropic goals." Alexander leaned forward. "I agree. I want to see us involved on a personal level, though, not just cutting checks." Several board members exchanged glances. One, a middle-aged woman named Hannah Fields, spoke up. "We can design a program where Morgan Institute representatives regularly visit the hospitals to assess ongoing needs. That would align with your directive for hands-on involvement." He nodded. "Exactly. Let's start by focusing on 1 or 2 hospital sites initially. From there, we can scale up." Peter arched an eyebrow. "Would you have any particular facility in mind?" Alexander hesitated, briefly recalling Grace's hospital environment. Although he wasn't entirely sure which Boston facility she worked for, she'd only mentioned the hospital. He found himself thinking of the possibility. "I need more information on specific needs. Let's gather data about the largest pediatric facilities in Boston. Then we can narrow it down." The meeting ended on a productive note, with the board eager to proceed. As the members left, Peter stayed behind. "So," he began, lowering his voice, "is Dr. Sullivan part of your motivation?" Alexander huffed a small laugh. "I won't deny that meeting her put a human face on pediatric care. It's not just numbers or statistics. These kids have dedicated doctors, and if we can help them do their jobs even better." Peter nodded in understanding. I see no problem with that. Just be open about your reasons. If she's the genuine article, she'll understand, and if not, he shrugged, letting the possibility linger. Alexander gazed out the window again, imagining wards filled with children fighting for their futures. I suppose I'll find out, he said, voice subdued but determined. Either way, it's time I got more involved. For too long, I've kept the Institute at arm's length. That needs to change. He glanced at his watch, considering whether to text Grace. A sense of responsibility tugged at him, both to the Institute and perhaps to something more personal. In that moment, he made a quiet vow to bridge the gap between his affluent world and Grace's everyday reality, uncertain how the two would fit together, but willing to try. Grace shuffled through patient charts at the nurse's station, trying to push away the nervous energy building inside her. She was off duty in an hour, and she'd promised Alexander she would meet him for dinner. Nothing extravagant, just a small Italian place near Beacon Hill, he had suggested. Yet the thought of it made her pulse quicken. "Earth to Dr. Sullivan," teased a nurse named Monica as she passed by. "Where'd you drift off to?" Grace snapped her attention back to the station and smiled sheepishly. "Sorry, I was, just thinking about some, administrative details." Monica gave her a playful grin before moving on. Once alone, Grace inhaled deeply, reminding herself to keep it together. She tried to focus on her job, double-checking medication schedules and reviewing discharge summaries. Yet her mind kept wandering to what she should say, or not say, to Alexander. She felt drawn to him, but the knowledge of that old donation hovered like a silent ghost, reminding her that any step further into this connection meant stepping onto fragile ground. At last, her shift ended. She changed into casual clothes and made her way to the restaurant, a quaint spot with warm lighting and checkered tablecloths. She found Alexander seated in a corner booth, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit. Despite the fine cut of his clothing, he appeared relaxed, maybe even a little eager. That alone made her heart flutter. He stood politely as she approached. "Good to see you," he greeted, leaning in for a brief, friendly embrace that momentarily took her breath away. "How was work?" "Busy," she replied, slipping into the seat across from him. "But I managed to finish without any major complications." A server appeared, offering them menus. They took a moment to order. Grace chose spaghetti primavera, while Alexander opted for chicken piccata. Once the server left, he folded his hands and studied her with genuine interest. "You look tired," he said gently, "but there's a glow about you too, like you find meaning in your work, even when it's hard." She smiled. "I do. It can be exhausting, but it's fulfilling." He nodded, visibly admiring her passion. "I've been learning more about pediatric funding and how crucial it is, especially in busy cities. If you could wave a magic wand, what would you change at your hospital right now?" His question caught her by surprise. She paused thoughtfully. "I'd expand the emergency ward. Sometimes we have to turn away children who need specialized equipment we can't afford. It breaks my heart every time." Alexander's gaze sharpened with empathy. "That's exactly what I've been discussing with my board. There's talk of creating a dedicated fund for children's emergency services. Maybe we can coordinate with—" He hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "I'd love your input on how best to allocate resources, if you'd be open to that." Her chest tightened. She wanted to say yes, to help secure better resources for the children under her care. But doubt flared. Would he eventually unearth the truth about her sister? Should she step away now, before things grew more complicated? For a moment, she stared at the flickering candle on the table, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. "Alexander, there's something you should know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "My family, we've—" Just then, Their server arrived with steaming plates of food, effectively cutting off her confession. By the time the waiter departed, the moment felt lost. Grace reached for her fork and took a slow bite, trying to settle her nerves. Alexander studied her. "You can tell me anything, Grace," he said softly, as though sensing her turmoil. She forced a small smile. "I appreciate that." Yet fear nudged her to be cautious. "It's just complicated. I don't want to drag you into my personal history too soon." He nodded, respect evident in his eyes. "Take the time you need. I'm not in a rush." "I'm just glad we're here." Dinner proceeded in a lighter vein, with conversation weaving between anecdotes from her medical rounds and amusing stories of his global travels, always related to his philanthropic projects, which he downplayed with modesty. The more she listened, the more she realized how sincerely he cared about other people's well-being. He wasn't the stereotypical billionaire she had once imagined. When they finally stepped outside, a gentle evening breeze ruffled her hair. Standing beneath a street lamp, they lingered, neither wanting to part ways too quickly. "Thank you for tonight," she said, sincerity in her tone. "It was nice to talk about things that matter to us both." He smiled, a slow, genuine curve of his lips. "It really was." At that moment, Grace felt a pivotal shift, as if the ground beneath her feet was urging her forward. She hadn't revealed the one secret that weighed on her most, yet the pull between them was undeniable. In the back of her mind, she knew that stepping into this new territory would inevitably lead her to confront her past. But as she said her goodbyes and walked away, her heart whispered that perhaps this chance at love was worth every risk that lay ahead. Grace Sullivan leaned against the wall outside a crowded hospital conference room, fidgeting with the ID badge clipped to her scrubs. She had just wrapped up another long shift, and exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. But an unexpected text had summoned her. "Meet me in my office, Dr. Camilla Hayes." Even in her early 60s, Dr. Hayes maintained a commanding presence in the pediatric department. Grace looked up to her as both a role model and a friend. Sliding open the frosted glass door, Grace stepped inside the small, book-lined office. Dr. Camilla Hayes glanced up from a stack of medical journals, her kind, wise eyes instantly softening. "Grace, dear, come in," Dr. Hayes beckoned, removing her reading glasses. "You look as though you've been dragging around a suitcase of worries. Sit, please." Grace settled into the worn leather chair across from the desk. "I know you're busy, Dr. Hayes." "Thank you for taking the time." Dr. Hayes waved off the gratitude. "Nonsense. I wanted to see how you're holding up. Word travels fast, and I heard you've been working double shifts again. You'll burn yourself out at this rate." Nodding, Grace let out a slow exhale. "It's been a lot. Between the usual workload and, well, some new developments, I haven't had much chance to breathe." Dr. Hayes gave a small smile. "Does this new development have a name and a noteworthy fortune attached to it?" A hint of embarrassment colored Grace's cheeks. "I didn't realize people were already talking." "When a Morgan shows interest in our department, everyone talks," Dr. Hayes said gently. "It's not gossip exactly. It's more like curiosity. He's a big donor, and you're our dedicated, compassionate pediatrician." She paused, her expression growing more serious. "I also hear he's taking quite a personal interest in you." Grace hesitated, wrestling with how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke, her voice subdued. "I do care about him, Alexander, but there's a history tying my family to the Morgan Institute. We received a donation long ago that saved my little sister's life, and it was given anonymously. He doesn't know I was on the receiving end of that generosity." Dr. Hayes rested her elbows on the desk, fingers steepled. "And you haven't told him?" "Not yet." I wanted to, but each time I freeze up, I'm afraid he'll assume I'm only interested because he once helped my family, or that I've been hiding it out of some manipulative intent. A compassionate light flickered in Dr. Hayes's eyes. You're not a manipulative person, Grace. If he's worth your time, he'll see that. But secrets have a way of growing heavier the longer you carry them. Grace fiddled with the pen on the desk, mulling over the truth in those words. He's planning a major donation. He's been asking for my insight on how best to use the funds. Part of me worries that if I tell him everything, he'll doubt my motives. Dr. Hayes leaned back in her chair. This is precisely why honesty is vital. If he's truly genuine, and from what I've observed, he might be, then you withholding your family's connection will hurt him more than the truth itself. It's a risk, but real relationships thrive on trust. Grace swallowed hard, her gaze dropping to the floor. I know. Reaching across the desk, Dr. Hayes patted Grace's hand. You're at a threshold, Grace. One foot is still in your safe, private world where you don't owe anyone explanations. The other foot is in a place of deeper connection, with Alexander and possibly new opportunities to help our patients. Stepping forward requires courage. Grace felt tears prick the corners of her eyes but blinked them away. I'm just so afraid of losing him before we've even had a real chance. You've conquered bigger fears. You fight for your patients every single day, Dr. Hayes reminded her gently. That same conviction can guide you now. Trust him enough to share who you are, scars and all. A moment of silence passed as Grace gathered her thoughts. The hum of the overhead fluorescent light buzzed softly in the background. Finally, she stood, shoulders set, with renewed resolve. Thank you, Dr. Hayes. You're right. Keeping this to myself is like waiting for the other shoe to drop, and I can't live under that kind of pressure. Dr. Hayes offered a warm, encouraging smile. I'm always here if you need to talk. Just promise me you'll get some rest soon. You're not much help to anyone if you collapse from exhaustion. Grace managed a small laugh, feeling lighter already. I promise. I'll try to rest, and I'll try to be honest with him. Maybe not all at once, but I'll get there. Dr. Hayes nodded approvingly. Good girl. Now go on. I've got a pile of papers to review that grows by the minute. Turning to leave, Grace paused at the door, glancing back with gratitude. Then she slipped out into the bustling corridor, determined to find the courage to tell Alexander everything. She knew the road ahead might be rocky, but if she truly believed in what they could build together, both for the children and for themselves, she had to take that first step into the unknown. Alexander Morgan sat behind the wheel of his sleek black SUV, driving along the winding roads leading to Martha's vineyard. In the passenger seat, Grace gazed out the window at the expansive sea. She'd agreed to spend the weekend at his private getaway, a decision that both excited and unsettled her. It felt like a departure from the life she'd always known. The modest apartment near the hospital, the endless shifts, the world she navigated with unwavering certainty. Now her heart pounded with questions. Was she ready to be part of Alexander's universe, even temporarily? Could she walk through doors where staff greeted him with deference, where the conversation often centered on portfolios and high-stakes philanthropy? As they pulled up to a stately yet understated seaside house, she took a calming breath. A uniformed caretaker emerged, opening the SUV door with a polite nod. The sight of a stranger waiting to assist her every move unsettled Grace, though she tried to conceal it behind a smile. Alexander came around to her side. "Let me show you the house," he offered, taking her hand gently. "I promise it's more cozy than it looks. I usually come here to escape." She followed him inside, stepping onto gleaming hardwood floors and into a wide foyer washed in natural light. The interior bore a coastal charm, white walls, plush furniture, and large windows framing the ocean in every direction. "It's lovely," Grace breathed, noting a subtle warmth she hadn't expected. "I was afraid it would feel too grand." He chuckled softly. "Well, it is a bit grand, I suppose, but once you get used to it, it's actually quite peaceful. No paparazzi, no hectic city noise, just the waves." They ascended a short staircase leading to a spacious living area where a gentle salt breeze wafted in through an open balcony door. Grace set her overnight bag on a chair. Feeling self-conscious, she turned to him. "Thank you for inviting me here. It's different from what I'm used to, but I appreciate the chance to get to know your world." Alexander stepped closer, resting a hand on her shoulder. "I'm the one who should thank you. This place feels less lonely when I have someone to share it with. I've wanted to spend time with you away from the hospital's constant demands." She gave a slight nod, fighting the flutter in her stomach. If only he knew how profoundly she carried the knowledge of their tangled past, his unknowing role in saving Lily. Even here, surrounded by beauty, the weight of that secret pressed against her chest. They spent the afternoon taking a walk along the shoreline. Grace slipped off her sandals, letting the tide lap at her ankles. Alexander rolled up his pant legs, occasionally picking up seashells and handing them to her with a childlike grin. The air was cool and invigorating, and for a while, Grace allowed herself to forget the looming conversation she needed to have. Later, they shared a simple meal prepared by the caretaker, grilled fish, fresh vegetables, and lemonade sweetened just right. Sitting on the balcony, they watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. Grace couldn't hold back a soft laugh. "The setting is so perfect, it's almost intimidating. I'm half expecting a magazine photographer to jump out and ask us to pose." Alexander's lips curved in a gentle smile. "I promise, no surprise photo shoots. This weekend is just about us." At the mention of us, her heart squeezed. She realized how dangerously close she was to stepping across a threshold she couldn't undo. She tried to speak, to shape the confession about Lily's transplant, but words stuck in her throat. The thought of shattering this serene moment was too overwhelming. Sensing her hesitation, he reached out and brushed his fingertips along hers. "Is something bothering you?" he asked quietly. "You've seemed distant since we arrived." Her pulse quickened. "It's nothing. Just adjusting, I guess. This place is breathtaking, and I'm not used to being away from my patients." He nodded, perhaps not entirely convinced. "If you ever need to get back, just say the word. I'd never keep you here against your will." She appreciated his consideration, but a pang of guilt nipped at her. He was giving her an escape route, yet she knew running wouldn't solve anything. The secret she held wouldn't vanish. Someday soon, she'd have to face the reality that her family's life had been directly impacted by his philanthropy. Nightfall deepened, bringing stars that sparkled over the dark ocean. Wrapped in a light cardigan, Grace watched the constellations emerge, quietly acknowledging that her old way of life, defined by duty and safe boundaries, was slipping further behind. A new reality beckoned, fraught with both promise and peril. For now, she'd let the hush of the waves shield her from her worries, but she knew that the next step into Alexander's world would demand far more than her presence. It would require her truth. Early the next morning, Grace awoke to the soft glow of dawn streaming through the sheer curtains in her guest room. The house was silent, except for the distant sound of waves lapping at the shore. Slipping out of bed, she tiptoed into the kitchen, where she found Alexander sipping coffee and flipping through a small notebook. "Good morning," she greeted with a gentle smile. He looked up, features brightening. "You're an early riser too, I see." "Sleep okay?" Grace nodded, running a hand through her hair. "Surprisingly well. Maybe it's the ocean air." He gestured to the coffee maker on the counter. "Help yourself. There's cream in the fridge if you prefer." Grateful for the normalcy of morning coffee, she poured herself a mug and joined him at the kitchen island. The aroma of freshly brewed beans mingled with the faint scent of salt air drifting in through a partially opened window. "What's that you're reading?" she asked, noticing his focus on the notebook. "It's a set of notes from my philanthropic advisory board," he explained. "We're trying to figure out how best to allocate funds for pediatric emergency services in Boston. I'd like to make sure we're targeting the hospitals that really need support." Her stomach fluttered. She set down her coffee. "If you need insight, I'd be happy to offer my perspective. I see the needs firsthand every day." Alexander looked genuinely pleased. "I'd appreciate that. Maybe after breakfast, we can discuss some specifics." The idea of collaborating with him on such a significant project sent conflicting emotions swirling through her. On one hand, it was a chance to secure much-needed resources for countless children. On the other, she knew it would bring her closer to the very information she'd been hiding, namely that one of the Morgan Institute's previous donations had saved her own sister's life. She managed a nod, her voice steady. "Sure, I can share what I know." After a light breakfast, they settled in the living room where sunlight poured in through tall windows. Alexander spread charts and proposals across a rustic coffee table. Medical terms and financial estimates dotted the pages, painting a sobering picture of underfunded pediatric wards. Grace traced a finger along one of the charts. "See here, this shows the current emergency capacity at several hospitals. Most can't accommodate the influx of patients during peak flu season, let alone specialized surgeries." Alexander frowned. "That's unacceptable." "Our children deserve better." She marveled at how swiftly he absorbed the data, asking incisive questions that revealed not just a desire to help, but a strategic mind capable of real impact. He was more than a wealthy donor. He was someone who cared to learn, to understand the nuances of what he was supporting. They spent hours discussing potential expansions, staff hiring, and the cost of equipment upgrades. Occasionally, their gazes met in a way that transcended professional collaboration. There was an unspoken warmth, a sense of two people forging a bond deeper than either had anticipated. As the morning stretched into early afternoon, the caretaker announced lunch was served on the patio. Alexander and Grace gathered their notes, heading outside to a table set with fresh salads, fruit, and grilled chicken. The ocean sparkled under the midday sun, adding a serene backdrop to their conversation. They spoke of other matters, her difficult shifts, his meetings with the Morgan Institute, little anecdotes about Rachel's newlywed adventures. Laughter punctuated their meal, the kind of bright, sincere sound that made Grace realize how much she enjoyed his company beyond just the philanthropic sphere. When they finished eating, Alexander leaned back, gaze drifting over the horizon. "It's strange," he murmured, "how the more I learn, the more I'm convinced that giving money isn't enough. I want to be involved, hands-on, meeting doctors, understanding their challenges. I'm tired of boardroom decisions that never see the reality in the hospital halls." Grace felt a surge of respect. "Not many people in your position have that outlook. It's commendable." He glanced at her with a soft smile. "I guess I have you to thank for that. You've opened my eyes to the human side of what we do." Her cheeks warmed, though she tried to dismiss the flutter in her chest. A small voice inside reminded her that if he discovered she'd been holding on to such a personal connection to his institute, this delicate trust might shatter, yet she couldn't deny the part of her that yearned to see his vision succeed, to help him transform pediatric wards across the city. "Then let's make a difference," she said, forcing a steady voice. "One step at a time. We can change how children are cared for." His eyes shone with gratitude. "Thank you, Grace." Sipping her glass of water, she stared out at the waves, silently vowing to find the right moment to tell him about Lily. For now, they existed in a hopeful bubble, forging plans to reshape the pediatric landscape. Little did they know that looming obstacles would soon test the fragile new world they were creating, demanding truth, and possibly threatening everything they had begun to build together. Grace's thoughts still swirled with weekend memories as she walked into the bustling lobby of Boston Children's Hospital on Monday morning. The noise of rolling carts, echoing footsteps, and faint cries reminded her that she was back in the thick of her daily life, a stark contrast to the tranquil hours spent at Alexander's seaside retreat. She waved a polite greeting to Monica, the head nurse, then made her way toward the pediatric wing. Along the way, she spotted Dr. Joseph Carter discussing charts with another physician. He caught sight of her and quickly excused himself, jogging over with a broad smile. "Grace, you look refreshed," he noted, eyeing her closely. "Dare I assume the weekend was a success?" Heat crept into her cheeks. "It was nice, yes. We talked about some potential funding for the hospital." Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow, teasing, "Oh, strictly business, I'm sure." She nudged him lightly with her elbow. "You know me better than that." "Honestly, Joseph, it was a real mix. Personal, professional. I'm still processing it all." They continued down the corridor, weaving around staff pushing a gurney. "Well," Dr. Carter said, "if his funding might help with that new pediatric equipment we've been begging the board for, we should all encourage this budding partnership." A pang of anxiety spiked through her. "Yes, about that. I need you to keep something under wraps for now. My family's connection to the Morgan Institute, it's not common knowledge, and Alexander doesn't know yet that his institute's donation helped my sister. I'll tell him soon, but I'm still figuring out the timing." Dr. Carter nodded with understanding. "Your secret's safe with me, for as long as you need. Just don't wait too long. Secrets have a knack for spiraling out of control." She gave a somber nod. "I know." They reached the nurses' station, where Elizabeth Harding, the hospital's administrator, was reviewing patient intake numbers. Dressed in a crisp grey suit and exuding an air of efficiency, she acknowledged Grace and Dr. Carter with a quick smile. "Dr. Sullivan, Dr. Carter, good morning," Elizabeth greeted. "I heard some rumors about potential expansions in our pediatric wing, thanks to a certain philanthropist you've been in contact with." Her discerning gaze flicked to Grace. "I hope there's some truth to it." Grace hesitated. "Alexander Morgan is considering various hospitals to support. He's definitely interested in ours, but nothing's finalized." Elizabeth's shoulders relaxed, just a fraction. "Well, any progress is welcome. The board is open to proposals if Mr. Morgan wants to tour the facility or discuss specifics." She lowered her voice slightly. "You might have heard that we're stretched thin on resources. If we can't secure better funding, we could face staff cuts or closure of certain services." A knot of worry tightened in Grace's stomach. "I'm aware," she murmured. "I'll do what I can to move things along." Elizabeth offered a business card. "Feel free to share my contact info with him." "I'm more than willing to meet any time, any place." Grace slipped the card into her coat pocket. Her mind churned with a mounting sense of responsibility. She already felt tremendous weight to help Alexander shape a plan that would benefit her hospital. But now she also carried the concern that failure might lead to devastating cutbacks. Later that morning, as Grace made her rounds, she passed by a colorful mural in the pediatric corridor that had been donated years ago, ironically by the Morgan Institute. A flutter of unresolved emotions caught her off guard, prompting memories of the time she'd found out the identity of the anonymous donor who saved Lily. She had felt profound gratitude, yet also confusion about how to express thanks without revealing herself. Now that the donor was literally in her life, The complexity threatened to overwhelm her. Lost in thought, she bumped into Mary Thompson, a volunteer in her 70s who offered story time and comfort to young patients. Mary stumbled slightly but steadied herself with surprising agility. "Oh, Grace, dear," Mary exclaimed with a laugh. "Caught me daydreaming again." Grace apologized, feeling sheepish. "I'm so sorry, Mary. I got distracted." "How are you?" With a warm expression, Mary adjusted the knitted shawl draped over her shoulders. "I'm well, dear. Just heading to read to some of the children. This hospital has been like a second home for me since I lost my granddaughter a few years ago. Volunteering makes me feel useful." Touched by Mary's kindness, Grace felt a surge of empathy. "I know you're making a difference. The kids adore you." Mary smiled softly. "I heard rumors about a new funding opportunity for our wing. Is it true?" Grace hesitated, then nodded. "We have a chance, yes. There's a philanthropist who's very interested in pediatric care. We're hoping it comes through." Mary rested a gentle hand on Grace's arm. "Hope is powerful, my dear. I'll be praying it works out. This place needs all the help it can get." With a final squeeze, Mary departed, leaving Grace with a swirl of thoughts. Allies, she realized, weren't just the wealthy or the influential. They included the volunteers, nurses, and administrators who fought daily battles for the well-being of the children. These were the individuals whose livelihoods and missions depended on whether Alexander decided to champion their cause. Unlikely as it seemed, Grace found herself at the center of it all, an ordinary woman bridging an extraordinary gap. For the sake of the hospital, and for the sake of her own heart, she silently vowed to see this through, even if it meant stepping out of her comfort zone, forging alliances, and revealing the truth that had shadowed her for so long. Alexander Morgan stood just inside the hospital's main entrance, eyes skimming the bustling scene. It was his first official visit to Boston Children's Hospital since he'd begun considering it for major funding. Everything about the space felt alive, bright murals on the walls, parents guiding anxious children through halls, and medical staff rushing with determined efficiency. He spotted Grace near the reception desk, consulting a chart with a nurse. She looked up, caught sight of him, and a slow, genuine smile brightened her features. Alexander felt a knot in his chest loosen. There was no denying the thrill he felt every time their eyes met. She waved him over. "I'm so glad you could come. Ready for a tour?" He tucked his hands into his coat pockets. "Absolutely. I want to see the real situation here, both the successes and the challenges." Elizabeth Harding approached, a polished yet friendly air about her. Extending a hand, she said, "Mr. Morgan, I'm Elizabeth Harding, hospital administrator. It's an honor to have you." He shook her hand firmly. "Thank you for welcoming me." "Please, call me Alexander." Grace guided him through a series of corridors, explaining the hospital's layout. They visited several wings, the brightly painted pediatric playroom, a busy ICU, and an under-equipped emergency area that Elizabeth confessed was in dire need of expansion. Alexander asked thoughtful questions about staff-to-patient ratios, the cost of advanced imaging equipment, and the possibility of supporting families who couldn't afford specialized treatments. As they progressed, Dr. Joseph Carter joined them, greeting Alexander with a relaxed smile. "I've heard a lot about your philanthropic work, Mr. Morgan. Delighted to meet you in person." "I'm happy to be here," Alexander replied. "And please, Alexander is fine." The small group continued to the children's ward, where they met Mary Thompson reading aloud to a room of attentive young patients. Mary paused her story, eyes lighting up at the sight of Grace and the newcomer. Grace introduced Mary, explaining her volunteer work. "Mary spends her days bringing a bit of magic to these halls. I think she's one of our best assets." Mary's warm gaze settled on Alexander. "So, You're the man interested in helping us grow." She spoke with a gentle authority. "I've been praying we'd get someone with a heart for these kids." Alexander smiled, unexpectedly touched. "I don't know about being an answer to prayer, but I do care about them, Mrs. Thompson." She chuckled. "That's all we need." With that, she turned back to her rapt audience, continuing to read a story about a brave knight and a gentle dragon. Before they left, one little girl reached out, clutching Grace's hand. "Thank you, Dr. Sullivan," she whispered, her tiny voice echoing in the quiet moment. "You make me not so scared." Grace smoothed the child's hair. "You're a brave one. Just keep resting, okay?" Alexander watched the tender exchange, a swelling in his chest that he struggled to articulate. Grace's care was so personal. As they stepped out into the hallway, he leaned close and murmured, "You're amazing at what you do." A faint blush touched her cheeks. "I just do my job." Elizabeth and Dr. Carter led the way to a small conference room. Once inside, they laid out reams of data on a table, budgets, projected needs, potential expansions. Alexander dove right in, scanning spreadsheets with an analytical eye. However, he made it clear that he wanted Grace's opinion on the front lines, not just administrative projections. Elizabeth beamed. "We'd be beyond grateful for any level of support you can offer, but if you're looking to make a transformative impact, we have a list of priorities." She tapped a chart. "Primary among them is upgrading the emergency ward. Doctor Sullivan can tell you how critical that is." Grace nodded, finding her voice. "We sometimes have to redirect patients to other facilities. That wastes precious minutes in cases where time is everything. Better equipment and an expanded ER would let us treat more children here without delay." Alexander studied the numbers. "I see, and a new imaging suite would also reduce the wait for scans." Dr. Carter chimed in. "Precisely. We lose valuable diagnostic time waiting for machines to free up, especially during peak hours. Questions and answers traded back and forth. Eventually, Alexander removed his glasses, massaging the bridge of his nose. "I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your planning. Obviously, this is bigger than just buying a few machines. We're talking about structural changes, staff training, long-term funding. It's a serious commitment." Elizabeth offered a hopeful smile. "We're prepared to partner with you however we can. We're not asking for a blank check. We want to build a sustainable plan that benefits everyone." Grace watched the conversation unfold, pride mingling with trepidation. If Alexander committed to this scale of support, he'd be deeply enmeshed in the hospital's future, and hers by extension. The looming question of her family's past connection tugged at her thoughts yet again. If she kept silent too long, would it sour everything? They wrapped up after nearly an hour, concluding with the promise to exchange more detailed proposals. As the group dispersed, Alexander lingered in the corridor with Grace. "That was eye-opening," he admitted, glancing around. "There's so much potential and so much need." She nodded, heart pounding as she measured his sincerity. "What do you think you'll do?" He exhaled. "I'm leaning toward a major commitment. But I want to finalize details with my board. Maybe we can talk more about it over dinner tomorrow." Her lips curved into a gentle smile. "I'd like that." He reached out, briefly covering her hand with his. "Thank you, Grace. I couldn't have gotten this far without you." As she watched him depart, her chest tightened. She realized that alongside the circle of support growing around the hospital, a deeper emotional tie was forming between them. And with each step forward, she inched closer to the moment she would have to reveal the truth that might change everything. A week later, Grace found herself standing in the grand lobby of the Morgan Institute's downtown office. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a panoramic view of the city skyline, and the polished marble floors reflected the flicker of recessed lighting. Despite the impressive surroundings, she felt a rising wave of anxiety. Alexander had invited her to a small reception celebrating a new partnership with a technology firm, an event he insisted could also serve as a chance for her to meet influential people interested in healthcare philanthropy. Adjusting her modest grey dress, she scanned the room filled with impeccably dressed guests. Waiters in crisp uniforms circulated with trays of canapés and champagne. Alexander was momentarily occupied with a group of business executives, so Grace stood by a side table, nervously sipping sparkling water. That was when Donovan Morgan approached, his stance exuding a certain skepticism. "Dr. Sullivan, isn't it?" he said, voice measured. "We met briefly at the wedding, though we didn't have the pleasure of a real introduction." Remembering Alexander's mention of his uncle's strong opinions, she extended her hand politely. "Yes, nice to meet you, Mr. Morgan." He gave her a once-over, then smiled, though the expression didn't fully reach his eyes. "I'm Donovan. Alexander speaks very highly of you." His tone suggested he was far from convinced of her merits. Grace inclined her head, keeping her composure. "I'm flattered he'd say so." A brief silence ensued, thick with unspoken judgments. Donovan took a sip of champagne. "I hear there's some big talk about a pediatric ward expansion. My nephew seems quite enamored with the prospect and presumably with your role in championing it." Sensing the underlying challenge, Grace responded evenly. "He's very dedicated to helping children. I'm just one of many advocating for improved care." Donovan mused. "You know, our family has been supporting causes for generations. We have to be careful about whose hands we place our resources in. People sometimes see an opportunity to exploit that generosity." Grace's heart drummed in her ears, but she forced a calm smile. "I understand your caution, but I assure you, I'm focused on the patients. I'm not looking to exploit anything." Donovan leaned in slightly, his gaze pinning her. "Forgive my bluntness, but what do you get out of this, Dr. Sullivan? Ambition for your career? Fame as the doctor who secured the Morgan backing." A flash of indignation sparked within her. She fought to keep her voice level. "I get the satisfaction of knowing children in crisis can receive proper care. Nothing more." He regarded her coolly, as though calculating whether he believed her. Before he could continue his silent interrogation, Alexander appeared by their side, his expression brightening when he saw Grace. "Uncle, I see you've met Grace," he said smoothly. "I hope you've been making her feel welcome." Donovan offered a perfunctory smile. "Just getting acquainted. I had a few questions about her intentions." Alexander gave Donovan a pointed look, but kept his tone cordial. "Grace's intentions are entirely admirable, Uncle. She's dedicated her life to pediatric care. There's no need to question her motives." Donovan tilted his head in mild capitulation. "If you say so, Alexander," then, casting one last measured glance at Grace, he excused himself to greet another group of guests. Grace exhaled, shoulders dropping with relief. Alexander gently touched her arm. "I'm sorry about that. Donovan can be protective of the family's philanthropic reputation." She managed a tight smile. "I can handle it. I suppose from his perspective, caution is understandable." Still, the exchange had rattled her. Seeing that uneasy look in Donovan's eyes, she couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he discovered the hidden link between her family and the Morgan Institute. Alexander, as if sensing her unease, guided her toward a quieter corner of the lobby. Soft music played in the background, and he leaned close so she could hear him above the chatter. "Don't let him scare you off. You're doing amazing work, Grace." His supportive words soothed her, but she couldn't shake a lingering dread. "Thank you," she whispered, forcing a small smile. "Honestly, it's not him I'm worried about." Alexander's brow creased in concern. "Is there something else? Are you uncomfortable here?" She hesitated, the confession almost tumbling out. But the timing felt wrong. This was neither the place nor the moment for the raw truth about Lily. Steadying herself, she gave a careful reply. "I'm just not used to this environment. High society events aren't exactly my usual scene." He nodded, accepting her explanation. "I understand. Let me introduce you to a few more folks. Then we can slip out early if you'd like," Grace agreed, yet a knot remained in her stomach. Donovan's pointed questions had shaken the thin layer of security she'd built around her secret. She feared that, in trying to protect Alexander from the awkward truth, she might be fueling Donovan's suspicions. Or worse, eroding the trust that was blossoming between her and Alexander. And so, in the glow of the Morgan Institute's glitzy reception, Grace found herself standing at the threshold of a moral dilemma. Risk revealing everything to Alexander, or keep her silence a bit longer, and hope that when the truth eventually surfaced, it wouldn't shatter the delicate foundation they'd begun to build. The mid-morning sunlight filtered through tall windows in the hospital's staff lounge, illuminating Grace's weary expression. She sat at a round table, cradling a cup of lukewarm coffee as Dr. Joseph Carter flipped through a patient chart next to her. Nearby, nurses and residents bustled about, grabbing quick snacks before their shifts resumed. Joseph peered at Grace over his glasses. "You look like you pulled another all-nighter. Everything all right?" She nodded, though the strain in her eyes betrayed her. "One of my patients developed complications. I had to monitor him until dawn. Plus," she added, lowering her voice, "all these fundraising matters with Alexander are piling on, and there's Donovan constantly poking around." Joseph grimaced at the mention of Alexander's uncle. "I heard he's quite the skeptic. Has he said anything more?" Grace took a slow sip of coffee, recalling Donovan's insinuations at the Morgan Institute event. "Not directly, but the way he scrutinizes me. It's like he's waiting for me to slip up. I can't shake the feeling he's digging for something, maybe even suspecting the truth about my sister's past transplant." Joseph closed the chart. "You can't let him intimidate you. He's just another obstacle. Focus on the real reason you're here. The kids. The rest is secondary." A beeping pager interrupted them. Joseph stood. "I have to check on a patient in the ICU. Hang in there, Grace." Left alone, she gazed at her phone, resisting the urge to text Alexander. He had a major board meeting that day to discuss finalizing a donation package. She wanted to wish him luck, or at least say she believed in him. But their relationship already felt precarious under Donovan's watchful eye. Every day she delayed explaining her connection to the Morgan Institute. The tension grew. With a sigh, she drained the last of her coffee and headed to the pediatric ward. Soon, she was immersed in her duties, comforting a tearful 5-year-old, updating a nurse on treatment protocols, reviewing lab results with a frazzled parent. In these moments, her heart settled. This world of children fighting bravely for health was where her passion thrived, and for a while she forgot her personal worries. It was early afternoon when Elizabeth Harding found her standing outside a busy exam room. The administrator's usual poised demeanor looked frazzled. "Grace, do you have a minute?" Elizabeth asked, her tone urgent. "Of course." Grace motioned for her to continue. Elizabeth led her aside into an empty waiting area. "I just came from a meeting with the hospital board. We've got a huge influx of patients and not enough beds or staff to handle them. We're on the verge of a crisis. Unless we secure additional funds fast, we may need to turn away certain cases or cut back on vital programs." Grace's stomach dropped. "I knew it was serious. But that bad?" Elizabeth nodded gravely. We're hoping Mr. Morgan's donation can bridge the gap, at least temporarily. But if it falls through or gets delayed, I'm not sure how we'll manage." An uneasy swirl of guilt tugged at Grace. She knew Alexander was trying his best, pushing the Morgan Institute to commit more resources, but Donovan's doubts and her own secret could derail everything. "He's in meetings today," she offered in a quiet voice. "Let's stay optimistic." Elizabeth placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "I'll do my part, but please, if there's anything you can say to reassure him or expedite the process, do it. We're desperate." Grace nodded, feeling the weight of Elizabeth's plea. As the administrator walked away, Grace slumped against the wall. The hospital was on the brink, and her romance with Alexander, already complicated, was entangled in it all. The line between personal hope and professional necessity blurred so sharply it cut. Later that evening, Grace finally mustered the courage to text Alexander. "Hey, hope your meeting went well. Let me know if you want to talk about anything." Grace. She stared at her phone for what felt like ages, pulse thrumming in her ears. 10 minutes crawled by with no reply, then 20. Finally, after almost an hour, her phone vibrated. Long day, negotiations still ongoing. Could use a friendly voice. "Call you tonight." A rush of relief washed over her. At least he was reaching out. She typed back a quick, "Yes, anytime." She tried to steady the swirl of anticipation in her chest. This conversation might be another chance to come clean, yet her nerves prickled at the thought. Could she truly drop that emotional bomb on him while he was under such pressure? Night fell. Grace finished her shift and drove home, mentally rehearsing how to break the news. "Alexander, your institute saved my sister's life 15 years ago. I've known that since the day we met." She imagined his reaction: shock, hurt, or worst of all, betrayal. As she pulled into her parking space, her phone buzzed. Taking a breath, she stepped out into the cool night air and answered. On the other end, Alexander's voice trembled with fatigue and guarded hope. He spoke of the board's resistance, Donovan's skepticism, and the uphill battle he was fighting to get a multi-year commitment for the hospital. Grace listened, offering reassurances about the real impact such a donation could have, praising his dedication. Her heart ached with every word she left unsaid. Finally, he exhaled in a heavy sigh. "Thank you for being my sounding board, Grace," he murmured. "I just wish I could see a clear path forward." Her throat tightened as she whispered, "So do I." They ended the call with a promise to meet in person soon. Standing in the dim glow of a street lamp, Grace clutched her phone, torn between relief at hearing his voice and the dread of what might happen when her secret inevitably came to light. The pressures around them were colliding, forging a path that would demand the truth, and soon, she feared, there would be no escaping it. The following afternoon, Grace found herself perched on a low wooden stool in a small child's hospital room. Bright drawings and stuffed animals crowded the windowsill, but the occupant, a pale, 10-year-old boy named Ryan, looked terrified. He needed an emergency scan for potential internal bleeding, yet the facility's scanning machines were all booked, leaving him on a waiting list behind other urgent cases. Grace checked his vitals and offered him a gentle smile. "Hang in there, buddy. We'll get you sorted out soon." Ryan clutched a plush dinosaur tighter. "I'm scared." "I know," she whispered, heart constricting. "We'll do everything we can to help you." Outside in the corridor, Dr. Carter hurried up to her. "I've tried contacting neighboring hospitals for an open scanner. Either they're at capacity or it's too far away. This is exactly the scenario we warned the board about." She glanced back at Ryan's room, frustration mounting. "Without expanded emergency imaging, we're stuck. This kid can't wait indefinitely." Dr. Carter's gaze flicked to his phone. "We're in crisis mode, Grace. If you have any sway with Alexander, Now's the time. Remind him what's at stake. Her cheeks warmed with a mix of guilt and urgency. I will. I promise. An hour later, she retreated to her office, a cramped space cluttered with textbooks, old coffee cups, and half-finished paperwork. Her phone rested atop a stack of patient files. She stared at the screen, thinking of how Ryan's predicament symbolized everything that hinged on Alexander's philanthropic support. She finally dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, his tone guarded but warm. "Grace, is everything okay?" "Not really," she replied, voice trembling despite her attempt to sound composed. "We've got a boy here who needs an urgent scan. We don't have enough equipment. He could deteriorate if we don't act soon." Alexander sighed heavily. "I'm sorry to hear that. I've been pushing for immediate funds. But the board wants more data, more assurances. They're hesitant about allocating such a large sum so quickly." Grace closed her eyes, recalling Elizabeth's warning about staff or service cuts. "Time isn't on our side," she said softly. "This is exactly why we need your help." "And it's not just Ryan. There are so many children caught in bureaucratic limbo." "I understand," he answered, a note of frustration in his voice. "I'm doing my best. My next board meeting is in 2 days. I'll argue for an emergency grant to expedite the equipment purchase." She hesitated, tears pricking her eyes. "Thank you, Alexander. Really." A tense pause followed, and she almost confessed the truth about Lily, but anxiety seized her. Would the revelation weigh on his already burdened mind? She chose silence, cursing the fear that held her captive. After ending the call, she slumped at her desk. Anxiety gnawed at her chest, a silent reminder that every moment she waited put not just her relationship but also her conscience in jeopardy. Ryan's predicament underscored how real the stakes were. Lives on the line, not just reputations or finances. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Grace left the hospital exhausted. She drove straight to her sister Lily's apartment, a small and cozy space in a quiet Boston neighborhood. Lily greeted her at the door with warm concern. "You look dead on your feet," Lily said, guiding Grace inside and offering a steaming mug of tea. Grace set the cup aside, glancing around at Lily's tidy living room. Framed photos showed Lily as a teenager, fresh out of a life-saving transplant that had transformed her future. "I need your advice," Grace blurted, pacing by the sofa. "This secret, I can't hold it much longer. Alexander's fighting tooth and nail to help the hospital, and I'm lying by omission." Lily's face sobered. "Maybe it's time to tell him. He deserves to know. But do it for the right reasons. Not because you think it'll unlock the donation." Grace wrapped her arms around herself. "I'm terrified that when I confess, he'll think I manipulated him or that I'm only with him out of gratitude. Donovan already suspects I have ulterior motives. If Alexander believes that too, everything falls apart." Her sister touched her shoulder. "Grace, you've done nothing wrong. You didn't choose this situation, it found you. And your feelings for him are real. That matters." Tears finally broke free, sliding down Grace's cheeks. "I just wish I knew how he'd react," she whispered. "I hate living in this constant tension." Lily pulled her into a hug. "Whatever happens, you can't keep punishing yourself. You've dedicated your life to healing others. You deserve a chance at honesty and happiness." They sank onto the sofa. Grace allowed herself a moment to cry, to let out the pent-up fears. When she finally pulled away, she felt a flicker of resolve. Maybe Lily was right. Holding back the truth any longer only deepened the web of complications. Outside, night had settled over the city, yet a sliver of moonlight fell across Lily's window, hinting at a path forward. Grace drew a slow breath, willing her racing thoughts to calm. She knew the crisis of conscience wouldn't pass until she faced Alexander with the whole truth. Whether it led to destruction or understanding, she had to find the courage to speak. On the day of the crucial Morgan Institute board meeting, Alexander paced the length of his penthouse living room, phone in hand. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Boston's skyline, but he took no notice. His thoughts roiled with the calculations and arguments he needed to present to sway the board toward a substantial, immediate donation to the hospital. He paused at the sight of a photograph on the mantel, a candid shot of him, Rachel, and a grinning Donovan at a charity gala years ago. Back then, he and his uncle had been on better terms. Now, Donovan seemed bent on challenging every philanthropic decision, especially ones connected to Grace. Alexander pressed his lips into a thin line. He couldn't afford Donovan's interference jeopardizing children's lives. His phone buzzed. The screen showed a message from Grace. "Good luck today, rooting for you, and for all those kids waiting on help." A soft smile curved his lips. As complicated as things were, her encouragement felt like an anchor. He texted back a simple, "Thank you. This means a lot," then hurried to finish dressing. Hours later, in the stately conference room on the 32nd floor of the Morgan Institute's headquarters, Alexander faced the board. Tall windows bathed the meeting in late morning light. His legal advisor, Peter Caldwell, sat on one side. Hannah Fields, a seasoned member of the Philanthropic Council, sat on the other. Donovan was there too, arms folded in a posture of skepticism. Alexander presented the hospital's dire situation: the overcrowded pediatric emergency ward, outdated equipment, children languishing in lines for vital scans. He explained the potential short-term fix, an immediate infusion of funds to purchase new imaging machines and support staff, and the long-term vision of expanding wards and training programs. The board listened intently, though Donovan's stern gaze never wavered. Once Alexander concluded, Hannah Fields leaned forward, tapping her pen on a stack of spreadsheets. "This is a significant investment. We're talking millions allocated quickly, with a multi-year plan for growth. Are we sure about the hospital's ability to utilize it effectively?" Alexander nodded. "I've toured the facility. I've spoken with doctors on the ground, especially Dr. Grace Sullivan. She gave me first-hand insight into exactly where funds are needed most." Donovan scoffed quietly. "Dr. Sullivan, right!" The subtle disbelief in his tone didn't go unnoticed by the rest of the board. Peter Caldwell cleared his throat, trying to diffuse tension. "We have verified data that supports her claims, Donovan. The hospital's finances and patient outcomes back up everything Dr. Sullivan has said." Donovan inhaled sharply. "I don't doubt the hospital's needs. I question the wisdom of writing a blank check without thorough vetting, and more importantly, whether personal influence is overshadowing objective decision-making." Alexander's temper flared. "This isn't a personal whim. Children's lives are at stake. And we're not handing them a blank check. I've outlined a structured plan with measurable milestones." Seeing the mounting friction, Hannah stepped in. "We could release an initial sum and set up quarterly reviews. If the hospital meets certain targets, we release more. That way, we maintain oversight while addressing urgent needs." A flicker of hope sparked in Alexander. "I'd be agreeable to that," he said. "I believe the hospital can prove its capacity." Donovan made a show of flipping through the documents in front of him. "Fine. But I want full transparency on the hospital's finances and Dr. Sullivan's role. I don't want this turning into a vanity project for someone who might be using our resources to elevate herself." Alexander gritted his teeth. "Grace is not that kind of person. She's dedicated to saving children's lives, not personal gain." "I suppose we'll see," Donovan countered, his gaze locking onto Alexander's. "I'll vote yes on the partial release of funds, but only if we secure a thorough audit process." The tension in the room crackled, but Hannah and several other members spoke in favor of the compromise. After a brisk round of votes, the motion carried. The board agreed to release an immediate sum to the hospital with strict oversight and incremental funding tied to performance. Alexander exhaled with relief. He'd achieved a partial victory that could still save lives in the short term. Peter gave him a quick, congratulatory nod. The meeting adjourned and board members began collecting their notes. Donovan lingered, straightening the documents on the table until only Alexander and Peter remained. "Don't let personal emotions blind you," Donovan said evenly, not meeting Alexander's eyes. "If Dr. Sullivan is genuine, great. But if there's something she's hiding, it'll come out. Secrets always do." Peter tensed at Donovan's implied threat. Alexander held his gaze. "I trust Grace," he said quietly, "and I won't let your cynicism destroy something that could benefit a lot of people." Donovan merely shrugged. "I've warned you. Let's hope you don't regret it." He turned and walked away, leaving Alexander in the echoing silence of the conference room. Despite the partial triumph in securing initial funds, Donovan's insinuations weighed heavily. Could there be a shred of truth to his uncle's suspicions? Alexander hated the notion. Yet, as he looked out the window, the city below seemed to whisper of secrets yet to unfold, secrets that might shatter his carefully laid plans if he wasn't prepared. 2 days after the board's decision, Grace stood at the hospital's main entrance, waiting to greet Alexander. Although he'd secured a partial donation, which would fund a new scanning machine and some vital staffing needs, she sensed the resolution was bittersweet. Donovan's looming distrust still hovered like a dark cloud. She spotted Alexander emerging from a sleek sedan, his posture betraying both triumph and a weary heaviness. He offered a tired smile as he approached. "Congratulations," Grace said softly. "This will really help." He nodded, adjusting his suit jacket. "It's a start, at least. We can get Ryan's scan soon and hopefully streamline emergency care for the next wave of kids. But the board's oversight is strict. They'll be watching every penny." Her chest tightened at the thought of Donovan's scrutiny. "The staff and I are ready to cooperate. We'll supply any data they need." They passed through the automatic doors, stepping into the bustling corridor. Elizabeth Harding joined them, her expression visibly relieved. "Mr. Morgan, thank you for your efforts. This interim funding is a lifeline." Alexander acknowledged her with a modest tilt of his head. "Just make sure it's used effectively. The board will want results." Elizabeth's eyes flicked meaningfully to Grace. "We will, Doctor. Sullivan has already started a priority list for equipment upgrades. Once the new scanner arrives, we'll reduce those dangerous wait times." With that, Elizabeth excused herself, leaving Grace and Alexander alone. Nearby, a group of nurses hustled past, discussing a new admittance. Grace gently guided Alexander aside to a quieter hallway. "Are you all right?" she asked, noticing the tension bracketing his mouth. He exhaled slowly. "It's been a marathon." "And Donovan's insinuations." He paused, meeting her eyes with a solemn gaze. "I'm sorry if he's made you uncomfortable. He keeps hinting there's something you're not telling me." Her heart dropped into her stomach. The moment she dreaded was glaring back at her. She opened her mouth, but before she could speak, a crash sounded from a nearby exam room, equipment hitting the floor, followed by a flurry of urgent voices. Grace pivoted on instinct. "I need to check that." "Can we talk later?" He gave a short nod. "Go." She dashed off, finding one of the resident physicians struggling to steady a piece of portable machinery. A nervous mother clung to her crying daughter. Within minutes, Grace calmed the chaos, directing nurses and comforting the family. By the time she re-emerged into the hallway, Alexander was gone, presumably to continue his tour or speak with Elizabeth about implementation details. Frustration swelled in her. Another chance to confess, lost. She wondered if some unseen force was blocking her at every turn, or if she herself was unconsciously fleeing from the truth. That evening, an impromptu celebration took place in the hospital cafeteria, a small gathering of staff toasting the imminent arrival of a new imaging scanner. Plastic cups of soda replaced champagne, and the tired smiles of nurses and doctors offered a glimpse of hope. Mary Thompson even brought homemade cookies, distributing them with a grandmotherly glow. Alexander made a brief appearance, raising a cup in solidarity. "This is really your victory," he said, nodding to the medical team. "I'm just the facilitator." The group applauded politely, but Grace noticed how drawn his features looked. Once the mini-celebration waned, she found him leaning against a vending machine, massaging his temple. "You need rest," she said, voice low. "You've been running yourself ragged." "Just a slight headache," he replied with a wan grin. "So many phone calls, negotiations, endless questions from the board." She rested a hand on his arm. "Let me take you somewhere quieter. The rooftop garden is usually empty this time of night." He nodded, appreciative. Together, they rode the elevator up to the garden level, stepping out into a small, sheltered terrace overlooking the city lights. Alexander breathed in the cool night air, shoulders relaxing marginally. They strolled to the edge of the terrace, gazing across illuminated skyscrapers. The hush felt fragile, a space where unspoken confessions lingered just beneath the surface. Grace felt her heartbeat hammering. If not now, when? She turned to him, summoning courage. "Alexander, I need—" Her words caught in her throat. The way he gazed at her, eyes warm with gratitude, made her tremble with fear of losing him. "Yes," he prompted gently. She swallowed hard. "I need you to know. I'm thankful for everything you're doing. For the hospital, for the children. It means a lot." Disappointment flickered in her chest, realizing she'd lost her nerve. He nodded, perhaps sensing there was more. But he didn't press. "I wish I could do more," he said softly. "I'm doing my best, but it never feels like enough." She slipped her hand into his, weaving their fingers together. A subtle comfort, yet also a reminder that the distance between them was built on her guarded secret. They lingered there under the stars, each acutely aware of words unspoken, both longing for deeper closeness and wary of the vulnerabilities that might unravel everything. Below, the glow of city lights pulsed, as if echoing the heartbeat of the hospital beneath their feet. Their shared moment felt like a narrow victory. The hospital was gaining crucial resources, but at the cost of her honesty and the weight of Donovan's looming shadow. And Grace knew with painful clarity that secrecy always exacted a price, one they would soon have to pay in full. A grey drizzle blanketed Boston the next morning as Grace stepped out of her car in the hospital parking lot. She clutched an umbrella in one hand, balancing a tote bag of patient files in the other. The sky's gloom felt symbolic, matching the unease she carried inside. Her chest felt tight with the knowledge that time was running out to tell Alexander the truth. Inside, she paused near a bulletin board covered with announcements, volunteer events, staff birthdays, a notice about the new scanner's impending delivery date. Joy and relief radiated from the colorful flyer, but Grace's gaze drifted to a note pinned beside it, a reminder of mandatory compliance audits requested by the Morgan Institute's board. There it was again, Donovan's watchful presence seeping into every corner of her work. Just then, Elizabeth Harding hurried past, phone clutched to her ear, exasperation furrowing her brow. "Yes, Mr. Morgan, I understand," Elizabeth said tersely. "We'll have those reports compiled. Dr. Sullivan is on top of the medical details. She can answer further questions if needed." She caught sight of Grace and thrust the phone into her direction. "He wants to speak with you." Grace's pulse jumped. She carefully balanced the umbrella and files, taking the phone. "Alexander," his voice crackled over the line. "Hey, Grace. Sorry to ambush you. I've got a last-minute teleconference with the board, and they're demanding a more detailed breakdown of how the emergency funds are being allocated. Can you get me an updated status by noon?" Her mind raced. Noon was only a few hours away. "I'll do my best. I'll pull data from the charge nurse and administrators. We'll outline exactly where every dollar is going." "Thank you," he replied, relief evident. "We're so close to finalizing a second wave of funding. I just need them to see the progress." Hanging up, Grace handed the phone back to Elizabeth, who sighed. "I'll help you gather the financial records and purchase orders. The scanner's en route, so that's a strong point in our favor." They split up. Grace dove headlong into the hospital's labyrinth of paperwork, double-checking invoice details, staff scheduling, and equipment budgets. Hours blurred as she pored over spreadsheets, coordinating with the finance department. At one point, Joseph swung by to drop off additional data on patient flow. "Thanks," she mumbled, barely looking up. He set a coffee beside her. "You'll need this, and good luck with Donovan breathing down everyone's neck." She rubbed her temples. "I feel like I'm living under a microscope. I can't slip up, and that includes my personal life." Joseph's gaze softened. "You've come this far. Don't let fear stop you from doing what's right, for the hospital and for yourself." A lump formed in her throat, but she mustered a grateful smile. Returning to the numbers, she forced herself to focus. By late morning, she had compiled a comprehensive report, complete with graphs and action plans. She emailed it to Alexander, copying Elizabeth, and prayed it would appease the board. Only a few minutes passed before her phone buzzed. His text read, "This is perfect. Thank you. I owe you a nice dinner after all this is over." A faint smile tugged at her lips. She typed back, "Deal," yet the small victory felt bittersweet. She longed to celebrate with him freely, without the constant weight of unspoken truths. That afternoon, she made her rounds in the pediatric ward, checking in on Ryan. The new scanner hadn't arrived yet, but a neighboring hospital had finally freed a slot. He was scheduled for his scan that evening. Kneeling by his bed, Grace offered him an encouraging smile. "This time tomorrow we'll have answers, Ryan. You're almost there." He nodded, clutching his dinosaur plush. "Thank you, Doctor." Sullivan. Stepping out, Grace nearly collided with Mary Thompson, who was toting a stack of children's books. "Easy now," Mary teased, steadying them both. Her gaze flicked over Grace's face. "Something's troubling you, dear. I can see it." Grace forced a laugh. "Just busy and maybe a little anxious. Big changes around here." Mary gave her a knowing look. "Change can be good, but it often reveals truths we've been hiding, even from ourselves." The words struck like a gentle echo of her inner turmoil. Grace mustered a nod, watching as Mary ambled off to entertain her next group of young patients. At the end of the day, Grace lingered by the hospital's entrance, gazing at the falling rain through the glass doors. In less than a week, the new scanner would be installed, thanks to Alexander's partial donation. More funding could follow, potentially transforming the entire pediatric unit, and yet she felt a pang of dread, as though standing on the brink of a final exam she wasn't sure she'd pass. In her heart, she sensed the greatest test was still to come, one that had nothing to do with spreadsheets or hospital audits. It lay in the moment she would reveal her family's history, her sister's life saved by the Morgan Institute. She imagined Alexander's expression turning from trust to shock, from admiration to anger, and the thought both paralyzed and compelled her. Drawing a steadying breath, she opened her umbrella and stepped out into the drizzling twilight. The path ahead glistened with rain-soaked pavement. For the sake of everyone relying on her, the hospital staff, the patients, and perhaps Alexander himself, she resolved to confront the truth soon. Because if she didn't, the storm she feared might break over them all. The wind whipped around Grace Sullivan as she stepped through the wide hospital doors late in the evening. She'd stayed after her shift to review final details on the new imaging scanner's installation, just 3 days away. The building felt emptier than usual, with most staff gone except for overnight personnel. Dimmed hallway lights gave the corridors a hushed quality that heightened her sense of foreboding. She nearly jumped at the sound of her phone buzzing. Glancing at the screen, she read a message from Alexander. "Need to see you. I'm heading to the hospital now. Is that okay?" Her heart thudded. She typed back, "Yes, I'll meet you in the family waiting area on the 4th floor." Alexander's arrival at such a late hour could mean something serious. Tucking her phone away, she tried to steady her nerves. Perhaps he just wanted an update on how the new machine would be integrated. Yet a whisper inside told her that Donovan's suspicions were still simmering, threatening to erupt at any time. By the time Grace reached the waiting area, Alexander was stepping off the elevator. His expression, set in hard lines, instantly put her on edge. She noticed tension in the way he clenched his jaw, as if barely containing a storm of emotions. "Alexander," she asked quietly, leading him to a corner of the lounge where they could speak privately. He exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. "I just came from a disturbing conversation with Donovan." He paused, gaze flicking to the muted glow of the overhead lights. "He showed me some documents, records from the Morgan Institute's archives. A donation made 15 years ago to cover a pediatric transplant operation." Grace's blood went cold. She glanced away, heart hammering so loudly she was certain he could hear it. I see. It was for someone named Lily Sullivan," Alexander continued, voice strained. "Donovan claims you've known all along, that you kept this from me because it could compromise my decision-making or that you might have manipulated me." She swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Alexander, I can explain. Please, just let me—" He held up a hand, eyes brimming with hurt. "Is it true? Your sister was the recipient of my family's donation?" Slowly, she nodded. "Yes. Lily was dying. Your institute saved her life." Tears pricked her eyes. "I only discovered it was the Morgan Institute after the fact, when I dug through hospital records. But by then, the donation was listed as anonymous. We never knew who actually authorized it." "I'd never planned to meet you." Alexander's shoulders sagged. "Why didn't you tell me, Grace?" She blinked back tears, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Because I was scared. Afraid that you'd think I only drew close to you out of gratitude, or that I wanted more financial help. You don't know how many times I tried to find the courage to say something, but every time, the stakes grew higher. And now with Donovan—" He turned his back momentarily, drawing a harsh breath. In the silence, the hum of the hospital's ventilation system seemed unbearably loud. "Donovan thinks you engineered this entire thing, that you recognized my name and orchestrated our connection to secure the hospital funding. I refuse to believe that. But why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth?" Her composure frayed. "It was never about trust, not exactly. I did trust you. But yes, I was also terrified of losing you the moment I admitted this. Don't you see? The more I fell for you, the scarier it became to reveal something that might shatter it all." Alexander's stare held a mixture of betrayal and lingering affection. "Grace, you have to understand how this looks. My entire board, especially Donovan, already suspects you, and now they have proof you've had ties to our institute for years." She reached for his hand, but he withdrew. "I love you," she whispered, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. "I wasn't trying to manipulate anything. This hospital, these kids mean everything to me, and meeting you was something I never planned, never expected." His eyes glossed with unshed tears, but his jaw remained firm. "I need time to process this," he said flatly. "Donovan wants a full investigation into the hospital's finances and your role. The board meeting tomorrow could turn ugly. And right now, I can't think straight." She swallowed her anguish, forcing a nod even as her chest constricted with guilt. "I understand." Without another word, Alexander turned and walked back to the elevator. The whoosh of the doors felt like a final, cruel punctuation. Grace sank into a nearby chair, trembling from head to toe. All her worst fears had materialized, and at the worst possible moment, when the hospital stood on the brink of transformation, reliant on Alexander's unwavering support. For a long time, she sat there in the silent waiting area, tears blurring the edges of the fluorescent lights. The truth was finally out, but the cost was immeasurable, leaving her with an agonizing sense that the connection she had come to cherish might already be lost. The next morning, Grace woke up to a grey sky through her bedroom window, a reflection of the heaviness she felt inside. Sleep had been elusive. Instead, she'd spent the night replaying Alexander's pained expression over and over. Determined to keep moving, she made her way to the hospital for her usual shift. The corridors buzzed with activity, and she tried to immerse herself in work, checking on Ryan post-scan, directing the new residents on routine checks. Yet a persistent weight pressed on her chest. By mid-morning, Dr. Joseph Carter found her in the break room. She was sipping stale coffee, eyes distant. "Hey," he said gently, "I heard about the confrontation with Alexander last night. Word travels quickly." Her grip tightened around the paper cup. "I'm not surprised. Donovan probably spread the news before dawn." Joseph set down a folder, concern softening his features. "Are you okay?" She let out a raw laugh, void of humor. "No, everything I feared has come true. Alexander feels betrayed. Donovan sees this as confirmation of his worst suspicions, and the hospital's future might be in jeopardy if the board doubts my integrity." Joseph rested a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Grace, you've done nothing wrong. You only hid this because you were afraid. That doesn't make you a bad person." Tears pricked her eyes. "Try telling that to Alexander or to the Morgan Institute's board. They might think I used the donation to trap him emotionally." He hesitated, then spoke with gentle honesty. "Don't assume the worst yet. Alexander cares deeply about you. He just needs time to understand your reasons. Give him space, but don't walk away unless he pushes you." Grace inhaled shakily, fighting the urge to break down. "I have no idea what to do next." Joseph gave her shoulder a comforting squeeze. "Focus on your patients for now. Let Alexander process. In the meantime, if Donovan or any board members come sniffing around, direct them to the hospital's administration. You shouldn't have to defend your medical professionalism against personal speculation." Nodding, she set her coffee aside and turned her thoughts to the tasks at hand. Work had always been her refuge, and if ever there was a time she needed that safe harbor, it was now. Shortly after lunch, Elizabeth Harding summoned Grace to her office. The administrator's usually composed demeanor looked frazzled, her desk piled with files and memos. She motioned for Grace to sit. "I just came out of a phone call with Donovan Morgan," Elizabeth began, rubbing her temples. "He demanded an internal review of our finances and your professional record, calling it an audit of potential conflicts of interest. The board wants it done quickly, within the week." Grace's stomach churned. "They're wasting no time." Elizabeth's gaze softened. "Grace, I've worked with you for years. I know your ethics are unimpeachable, but the timing couldn't be worse. The new scanner arrives in 2 days, and now we've got the Morgan Institute breathing down our necks." Grace's voice quavered. "What do you need from me?" Elizabeth slid a stack of paperwork across the desk. Compile a thorough record of your involvement in all philanthropic efforts, grants, donations, any instance where your name might appear in connection to financial transactions. Also, we'll need your time logs, patient outcomes, departmental budgets you've helped shape. This is about being transparent. She swallowed hard, nodding. I'll do it, whatever it takes to protect the hospital. As she left Elizabeth's office, she felt simultaneously drained and resolute. If Donovan intended to paint her as a manipulator, she would counter with the truth of her unwavering dedication. Still, a hollow ache persisted. Would the evidence convince Alexander she was genuine, or had her silence already damaged their bond beyond repair? Late in the day, she spotted Mary Thompson in the pediatric ward, reading to a small boy recovering from surgery. Once the session ended, Mary approached Grace, her lined face etched with gentle concern. I heard there's been some fuss with the donors, Mary ventured softly. You don't look your usual bright self, dear. Grace managed a thin smile. That's an understatement. Things are complicated. Mary studied her a moment, then spoke with quiet confidence. In my experience, the truth eventually comes out, whether we hide it or not. It hurts less if we face it head-on and trust the people who matter. If they can't forgive us for our mistakes, perhaps they weren't meant to be in our lives. Grace blinked back tears, deeply moved by Mary's empathy. That's what I keep trying to tell myself. I just wish it wasn't so painful. Mary patted her hand. Pain can lead to growth. You've got a good heart, Grace. Sometimes the people we love need time to catch up to the truth. Give him space, but don't give up on him. That evening, Grace returned home to find Lily waiting outside her apartment door, worry visible on her face. She let her sister in, and they sat at the kitchen table as Grace recounted the confrontation. Donovan found the records, Lily said, shaking her head. It was only a matter of time, I guess. Grace bit her lip. Alexander looked devastated, and I don't blame him. I hid something huge. Lily sighed, reaching across the table to clasp Grace's hands. We owe him an explanation, maybe from both of us. If he can see the impact it had on my life, maybe he'll understand your hesitation. Grace felt the sting of tears again. I'm not sure he wants to see me at all right now, but yes, we need to try. The hospital's fate is also on the line. They spoke in hushed tones about how best to approach Alexander, or if he would even grant them a meeting. Eventually, the two sisters embraced, finding a flicker of solace in the bond that had started this entire chain of events so many years ago. When Lily left, Grace stood by her window, gazing at the city lights. A dozen floors below, cars weaved through the streets like tiny beacons. She wondered if Alexander was out there, also staring at the night sky, wrestling with anger and hurt. All she could do was wait, hope, and prepare for whatever the next day might bring. Because in the wake of the confession, clarity was elusive, but necessary if there was to be any chance of salvaging not only their fragile love, but the hospital's newly won support. 2 days later, the long-awaited scanner arrived at the hospital. The sun had just crested over the rooftops when a large delivery truck pulled into the loading bay. Grace, Elizabeth Harding, and Dr. Joseph Carter were there to greet it, along with a few excited nurses. As the crate bearing the new imaging machine was carefully unloaded, a ripple of hope and relief coursed through the small, welcoming committee. Finally, Elizabeth breathed, her tense posture loosening a fraction. This is a game changer for us. Joseph nodded fervently. We can save more children from needless delays. Grace managed a soft smile, though her heart still felt weighed down. Even this good news couldn't fully dispel the ache of Alexander's absence. A wave of guilt washed over her. He had fought so hard for this equipment, yet he wasn't here to witness its arrival. She wondered if he even knew it was coming today, but the hospital's immediate needs demanded her attention. She spent the morning helping the technicians and bioengineers figure out the best place to install the scanner, ensuring it connected seamlessly with existing systems. Watching the final calibrations, she felt a flicker of gratitude for the Morgan Institute's partial funding, even if everything else was in turmoil. Around midday, Elizabeth informed Grace that the Morgan Institute's audit team would arrive the following morning to review finances and interview key personnel. It felt like a storm cloud rolling back in, overshadowing the bright moment of progress. With a deep breath, Grace told herself to remain steadfast. She was headed to the cafeteria for a quick lunch when her phone buzzed. To her surprise, it was a text from Alexander. "Heard the scanner arrived today. Congratulations. Would like to stop by in the evening for a private look. Is that possible?" Her heart hammered. Perhaps this was the opening she'd prayed for. Quickly, she responded, "Yes, I'll be here till late. Let me know when you're coming, and I'll meet you by radiology." The rest of the day passed in a blur, her thoughts split between the hospital chores and bracing herself for seeing him again. By the time the sun began to set, she'd managed to review her notes for the upcoming audit, gather financial records, and sign off on the scanner's final installation forms. Exhaustion tugged at her, but she willed herself to stay focused. Around 7 in the evening, Alexander arrived, dressed in a simple dark coat rather than his usual tailored suit. He slipped in through a side entrance, presumably to avoid drawing attention. Grace waited outside the newly equipped imaging room. When she spotted him, her pulse jumped. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. He glanced at the shining new machine behind the glass window. "It's impressive," he admitted. "I wanted to see for myself what all this fighting was for." They stepped into the imaging suite, the faint hum of electricity surrounding them. The polished surfaces gleamed under bright overhead lights. He ran a hand over the edge of the scanner, exhaling a breath that sounded both admiring and sorrowful. "This is a big step for the hospital," he said, voice subdued. "It's going to change lives." Grace nodded, biting her lip. "You made this happen, Alexander. I wish you could share the moment with the staff, but..." He stepped back, arms folding tightly across his chest. "Donovan has made sure everyone views me as some kind of watchful hawk, swooping in to audit them. I didn't want a scene." She looked down. "I'm sorry." A tense pause followed. The air between them felt charged, but also fragile. Finally, he broke the silence. "I've spent the last 2 days sifting through the details of my family's old donation files. I spoke to a few people who were around at the time. Everything lines up with your story. It seems your sister truly was just the recipient of an anonymous donation we arranged." Grace ventured a cautious step toward him. "That's exactly what happened. I had no idea it was the Morgan Institute until long after Lily's transplant, and I never knew it was personally tied to you. Please understand that I was never trying to exploit your family." His gaze met hers, searching. "I want to believe that I do, but do you realize how it felt to learn this from Donovan, of all people? How blindsided I felt." Her throat tightened. "I know. And it kills me that you discovered it that way," she swallowed, tears burning behind her eyes. "But it doesn't change how I feel about you, how I've always felt. I didn't plan any of this. I fell in love with the man who cares about children's futures, who invests his time and heart, not just his money." Emotion flickered over his features. He looked torn, trapped between anger, sorrow, and the lingering affection she still saw in his eyes. After a moment, he reached out tentatively, taking her hand in his. That small contact sent a wave of relief through her. "I believe you, Grace," he whispered. "I'm still hurting, but I believe you, and I miss you." She let out a shaking breath, tears slipping free. "I miss you too." For a moment, they simply stood there beside the machine that symbolized hope for the hospital's children. Yet the unspoken tension remained. Donovan's threats, the looming audit, and the shattered trust still hung in the air. Alexander released her hand gently. "This isn't over," he said, voice low but resolute. "Donovan is moving fast on the investigation. I have to see it through. But I promise I'll do everything in my power to make sure the hospital doesn't suffer." Grace nodded, heart pounding. "And us?" He closed his eyes for a beat. "We'll see. I'm not giving up, but I need to clear my head. Let's survive this audit, then we'll find a way forward." A silent understanding passed between them. They had to prove their integrity to the board, to Donovan, and perhaps most importantly, to each other. The next morning dawned crisp and bright, a stark contrast to the tension gripping the hospital. The Morgan Institute's audit team was scheduled to arrive by mid-morning, ready to comb through every ledger, purchase order, and personnel file related to the new donation. Whispers ran through the corridors, staff members casting worried glances at Grace whenever she passed. She did her best to project confidence, though inside she felt as though she were walking a tightrope. Elizabeth Harding called an urgent assembly in the main conference room just before the auditors were due. The room filled quickly, nurses, department heads, doctors and administrators wearing pinched expressions. Grace took a seat up front, near Dr. Joseph Carter and Mary Thompson, both of whom offered her encouraging smiles. Elizabeth cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We're about to undergo a thorough review by the Morgan Institute, and I need everyone to cooperate fully. We have nothing to hide. Our records and intentions are transparent, but we must be prepared." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the senior pediatricians raised a hand. "Will this jeopardize our new scanner or future funds?" Elizabeth's gaze flicked to Grace. "We hope not. Mr. Morgan has reassured me that if our records are in order, the second wave of funding should proceed. But we must present everything accurately and calmly. Any hostility or defensiveness will only add fuel to the fire." Grace shifted in her seat, acutely aware that Donovan's main target might be her. After the meeting, Dr. Carter drew her aside. "If they ask you questions, personal ones, answer truthfully. Don't let fear warp your responses. Your track record is impeccable. They'll see that." She nodded, nerves buzzing. "I appreciate your confidence. I just hope it's enough to convince Donovan." Within the hour, a small contingent of professionals strode in, 3 men and 1 woman in tailored suits, lanyards with Morgan Institute badges hanging from their necks. To Grace's relief, Donovan Morgan was not among them. The lead auditor introduced himself as Carter Watson, a silver-haired man with calm, intelligent eyes. They set up laptops and files in a boardroom, immediately requesting financial data from Elizabeth's team. Grace was called in first for an interview. She took a deep breath and entered the room, forcing a polite smile. "Dr. Sullivan, thank you for joining us," Carter Watson began. "We'd like to talk about your role in the new donations implementation, the equipment purchases, and your professional relationship with Mr. Alexander Morgan." Her spine tensed at the last point. "Of course, I'm happy to clarify anything you need." For the next 30 minutes, they peppered her with questions, ranging from budget line items to how she advised Alexander on the hospital's needs. She explained her position, focusing on patient care and departmental logistics. Then, as she anticipated, the questions turned personal. "We understand you have a familial connection to a previous Morgan Institute donation, one that saved your sister's life," Carter said, his tone neutral. Grace kept her voice steady. "Yes, that donation was anonymous at the time. I only learned years later that it came from the Morgan Institute." I did not know Alexander personally, nor did I seek to form a relationship with him under false pretenses. The auditors jotted notes, occasionally exchanging glances. Grace felt her heart pounding. "Have you ever used that information to influence Mr. Morgan's decisions?" the woman auditor asked quietly. Her pulse throbbed in her ears. "No. My interest has always been in securing better resources for the children here. My personal history made me appreciate what philanthropic support can do, but I never manipulated any choices. My only goal is to help save lives." They nodded, scribbling more notes. Eventually, Carter Watson closed the file. "Thank you, Dr. Sullivan. That will be all for now. If we have further questions, we'll be in touch." She left the room feeling drained, as though she'd run a marathon of emotional exertion. Mary Thompson found her in the hallway, handing her a small to-go cup of herbal tea. "You'll need this," Mary said gently, "and keep that chin up." Grace sipped the warm liquid, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. She knew other staff members would be grilled similarly, and Donovan's vendetta might yet rear its head in a more direct manner. Still, she took solace in the fact that Alexander had not abandoned her. Even if he needed space, he had not allowed Donovan to be the final voice here. The hospital's staff, her allies, remained firmly on her side. By day's end, the auditors had concluded their first round of interviews. They left with binders of documents and carefully typed notes, promising to give a preliminary assessment within 2 days. Tension still electrified the air, but a small wave of relief swept through the hospital as they departed. People trickled home, physically and emotionally spent. Standing outside at dusk, Grace felt the crisp air on her cheeks. She gazed at the silhouette of the city against the orange sky, remembering Alexander's words, "We'll see." She had no idea what the final verdict from the audit would be, or if her relationship with him could mend. But she also felt a spark of hope. Adversity had a way of revealing true character, and maybe, just maybe, honesty would triumph over suspicion. 2 days later, the staff gathered in the hospital's main lobby to await the preliminary audit results. Emails had circulated that morning, announcing a short press briefing with representatives from the Morgan Institute and the hospital present. Whispers of uncertainty swirled in the crowd. Grace, standing near Joseph and Mary, felt her heart pound every time someone so much as cleared their throat. Just after noon, the elevator doors opened, revealing Carter Watson and the other auditors, looking composed yet resolute. They were followed by a familiar figure, Alexander Morgan, who stepped out with purposeful calm. Grace's heart twisted at the sight of him. Though his face was set in a neutral mask, she caught a flicker of warmth in his eyes when they briefly met hers. Elizabeth Harding approached, microphone in hand. "Thank you, everyone, for joining us," she said, her voice carrying a tense edge. "Mr. Watson will share the Morgan Institute's preliminary findings." Watson cleared his throat, scanning a small sheet of notes. "Our team reviewed the hospital's records pertaining to the recent donation, as well as Dr. Sullivan's involvement. We conducted interviews with staff and leadership, examined financial statements, and sought corroboration for all major decisions." An audible hush fell over the lobby. Grace clenched her fists at her sides, Mary gently squeezing her arm in silent support. "Based on our initial review," Watson continued, "we find no evidence of unethical conduct or misuse of funds. The hospital's new imaging equipment purchase was executed according to stated proposals. Dr. Sullivan's personal connection to a historical Morgan Institute donation does not appear to have influenced or distorted the current philanthropic partnership." A collective exhale swept the room. Grace nearly sagged with relief, tears prickling her eyes. She caught Alexander's gaze, seeing a hint of a smile tug at his lips. Watson held up a hand. "However, We acknowledge that tensions arose because of undisclosed personal ties. While this is not a breach of contractual obligations, we recommend stronger transparency protocols moving forward. This will ensure the board is fully informed of any personal or historical connections that might affect philanthropic activities. Elizabeth stepped back up to the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Watson. We appreciate your thoroughness. The hospital will certainly adopt any recommended changes to maintain integrity. A smattering of applause rippled through the gathering. Relieved staff, volunteers, and even some from the press who had assembled to cover the story. Grace felt the tension in her shoulders dissolve, replaced by a fragile sense of triumph. She could almost see Donovan scowling in the background, though he was noticeably absent. Perhaps he'd chosen not to witness a public setback. Alexander stepped forward to speak, the crowd hushing instantly. On behalf of the Morgan Institute, I want to reaffirm our commitment to this hospital. We believe in the staff's dedication and their mission to save children's lives. We look forward to finalizing our multi-year donation plans soon. Polite applause followed. Grace stood rooted in place, torn between gratitude and the aching reminder of her fractured relationship with him. But then Alexander did something that made her chest tighten. He scanned the faces until he found hers, and, with determined steps, crossed the lobby to stand beside her. The hush that fell over the watchers was almost palpable. Journalists edged closer, sensing a story beyond the official statements. Grace's heart pounded. She glanced at Elizabeth, who looked both curious and supportive, then back at Alexander. "You okay?" he asked softly, ignoring the onlookers. She nodded, voice catching. "Better than okay, thanks to the audit results." He exhaled, relief mingling with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry it had to come to that, but the truth prevailed. Donovan is, well, he'll have to accept these findings." Gathering her courage, Grace placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Thank you for letting the process run its course. I know you could have done more to shield me from suspicion, but maybe it was better this way. Everything is in the open now." He dipped his head in a slow nod. "Sometimes transparency hurts, but in the end, it's necessary." A pause. "And us." She bit her lower lip. "I want to fix things, Alexander. I never meant to deceive you, I just—" He gently pressed a finger to her lips, stopping her words. "I know. You did what you thought was best, and I let my own fears color my reaction." After a beat, he added, "Maybe we can talk somewhere quieter later. Figure out how to move forward." Emotions welled in her throat, and she nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes. "I'd like that." The press cameras captured their subdued but meaningful exchange. The hospital staff, sensing a personal moment, began dispersing. Elizabeth quickly guided the official Morgan Institute auditors to a conference room for further paperwork, leaving Grace and Alexander by the lobby's large windows, bathed in midday light. Mary Thompson hovered at a respectful distance, a proud sparkle in her eyes. Dr. Joseph Carter flashed Grace a thumbs up from across the room. Their silent encouragement wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. Even in this highly public setting, it felt as though she and Alexander occupied a small bubble of tentative peace. "Let's give the rest of the staff a reason to celebrate," Alexander said quietly. "They've been through enough anxiety." Grace could only nod, hope blooming in her chest. While the reckoning had been public and difficult, it seemed the worst of the storm was passing. The hospital could continue its mission without the specter of scandal, and she had a chance, however fragile, to mend the bond she'd feared was lost forever. Together, they turned away from the lingering crowd, side by side. Though the path ahead still held challenges, The spotlight that once exposed every secret now offered a chance for honesty, forgiveness, and the renewal of the tender connection they both so desperately wished to preserve. The hospital corridors felt brighter than they had in weeks, as though a literal weight had been lifted from the building's foundations. News of the successful audit and the Morgan Institute's continued support spread quickly, leaving staff and volunteers buoyed by renewed hope. Grace Sullivan couldn't help but notice the subtle shift in energy, fewer worried frowns, more smiles from nurses and residents. Even the children appeared to sense the easing of tension, their giggles louder and more frequent. Late one afternoon, Grace slipped into the pediatric playroom, where Mary Thompson was leading a finger-painting session. Vivid splashes of color decorated large sheets of paper taped to the walls. A young girl with pigtails extended her messy hands toward Grace, giggling at the prospect of smearing paint on the doctor's scrubs. Grace smiled in return. "Maybe later, sweetheart? I'll change into some spare clothes first." Mary beckoned her closer, letting the children momentarily splash paint in carefree abandon. "It's wonderful to see such relief in the air," she said softly, voice warm. "Everyone's been through so much, but we made it." Nodding, Grace watched a child proudly display a rainbow swirl of paint on a scrap of paper. "We have. Thanks to the Morgan Institute's donation and the staff's perseverance, we're in a better place. Still, there's something I need to do before I can fully breathe easier." Mary tilted her head. "Alexander," Grace sighed. "Yes, we've talked a little, but not in depth since the audit results. We need real closure on everything that happened. The donation, my sister, the half-truths. I don't want to live with lingering questions." Mary patted Grace's arm, leaving a bright paint smudge on the fabric. "Then don't wait too long. Waiting can breed doubts and fears. Face it, my dear, you'll be glad you did." That same evening, Grace found herself pacing the hospital rooftop garden, her phone clutched in hand. She'd texted Alexander an hour earlier, inviting him to meet her after his business dinner. The sky was a dusky lavender, stars poking through the remnants of twilight. The air carried a crisp chill, brushing her cheeks like a gentle nudge toward courage. When the elevator doors finally slid open, she watched Alexander step onto the terrace. His expression was serious, yet a small, cautious warmth glowed in his eyes when they landed on her. For a moment, they simply stood there, letting the breeze ruffle their hair and clothing. "Thank you for coming," she began, voice subdued. "I know it's late," he exhaled slowly. "I'm glad you reached out." "I've been wanting to talk too." They walked side by side to the garden's edge, overlooking the city's skyline, tall buildings sparkling like watchful guardians in the night. For a beat, neither spoke. The only sound was the rustling of leaves in raised planters. Finally, Alexander broke the silence. "We weathered the audit, but I don't want to pretend none of the pain happened. We owe each other honesty. Total honesty." Grace nodded, heart thudding. "I agree. I'm sorry for everything. My silence about Lily, the timing, the way it all came out. I never intended to hurt you." Alexander rested his hands on the railing, gaze lingering on the glowing horizon. "I was hurt, shocked, but my anger was partly at myself for not seeing the signs or asking questions earlier. Maybe if we'd both been braver, we could have avoided all this tension." She swallowed, eyes stinging. "When I first realized who you were, that your institute saved Lily, I had so many conflicting emotions, gratitude, fear, admiration. I'd already fallen for you by then, and it felt too big to put into words." He turned, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Your feelings were real. I know that now, and you need to know that my feelings were, and are, real too." Relief coursed through her, tears forming. "I'm so sorry if I ever made you doubt that." I never wanted to jeopardize the hospital or us. He gathered her hands in his. We can't erase the past, but we can move forward with clear hearts. That is, if you still want to. A tear slid down her cheek as she managed a nod. I do. So much. I just don't want any secrets between us. Ever again. He drew her into a gentle embrace, the city lights illuminating them in a soft glow. In that moment, the rooftop garden felt less like a place of anxious waiting and more like a sanctuary of second chances. They stood there for what felt like both an eternity and a single instant, breathing in the quiet reassurance that came from shared vulnerability. Eventually, they pulled back, gazing at each other with a tenderness that hadn't been possible before. No cameras, no onlookers, no hidden truths, just the two of them, finally free to chart their path together. Tomorrow, Alexander said softly, let's meet again outside these hospital walls. We'll talk about everything. Lily, the donation, the future we might build together. Grace smiled through her tears. I'd like that. As they walked back to the elevator, hands still linked, Grace felt the knot in her chest begin to unwind. This was only the first step on a long journey back to trust, but they were taking it side by side. And that, she realized, was a gift she almost lost, one she would cherish with all her heart from now on. The following afternoon, Alexander Morgan picked Grace up from her apartment in a sleek black sedan, nothing ostentatious, but comfortable enough for a quiet escape from Boston's bustle. He'd chosen an art gallery in Cambridge for their conversation, hoping the serene setting would let them talk freely, away from the hospital's constant demands. The gallery was an airy, sunlit space with high ceilings and sparse crowds on a weekday. Gentle piano music played through hidden speakers, filling the rooms with a calming melody. Rows of paintings adorned the walls, ranging from classic landscapes to abstract bursts of color. It was an environment that encouraged reflection, exactly what they needed. They began by strolling through the first few exhibits in silence, hands loosely entwined. The hushed reverence of the place seemed to mirror the careful, healing hush in their hearts. Eventually, they settled on a wooden bench in front of a modern painting, swirls of turquoise and orange colliding in lively patterns. Grace studied the painting, then turned her attention to Alexander, inhaling the gentle scent of his cologne. He spoke first. I chose this place because I needed a reminder that beauty can rise from chaos. I look at these pieces. Some of them seem wild or disjointed, yet when you step back, they form a harmonious whole. Grace's lips curved in a soft, thoughtful smile. That's poetic. And it's exactly how I feel about everything we've been through. He nodded. Now that the hospital's audit is behind us and Donovan's concerns have been addressed, I realize how much time we lost to misunderstandings. I don't want that anymore. Warmth spread in her chest. Nor do I. It's time I share everything I've kept bottled up. She told him in detail how Lily's illness had consumed her family 15 years ago, an emotional battle that left them desperate for a savior they never thought would come. She recalled the day a hospital administrator informed her parents that an anonymous donor had covered the entirety of Lily's transplant costs. The memory of her sister's pale face in the ICU, the squeak of the oxygen machine, all etched in her mind forever. Alexander listened intently, eyes misty. I've heard stories about our institute's beneficiaries, he murmured when she paused for breath. But I never realized how personal it could feel on the receiving end. Grace gently placed a hand over his. It changed everything for my family. It inspired me to go into medicine. I promised myself I'd devote my life to giving other kids the same chance Lily had. He squeezed her fingers, heartache visible on his face. All this time, Donovan accused you of using the Morgan name for personal gain, but it was the opposite. You were trying to repay a kindness in the only way you knew, by serving others. She lowered her gaze. Yes, when I met you by chance at that wedding, it felt like fate, but the fear of losing what we had kept me silent. Every day that passed only made it harder to speak up. Alexander swallowed, then brushed his thumb across her cheek. I understand. In hindsight, I wish I'd asked more about your past, gotten to know your family sooner. Maybe we could have avoided the shock. A sorrowful laugh escaped her. We both learned from this. Maybe we needed the turmoil to see each other honestly. They sat quietly for a moment, letting the hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of footsteps around them serve as a quiet backdrop. Then she took a deep breath and ventured, "You must be disappointed in Donovan." Alexander's jaw tightened. "He's protective of the family fortune and suspicious of anyone close to me. I can't fault him entirely. He's seen people try to take advantage before, but what he did to you was cruel. I won't let him tarnish your reputation again." Their hands clasped together more firmly, as if forging a silent vow. "Thank you," she whispered. "But please, don't jeopardize your relationship with him on my account. I want to earn his respect if that's at all possible." He regarded her with gentle admiration. "Your generosity astounds me, Grace. First the children, now even Donovan. You never stop caring." She blushed, focusing again on the vibrant painting before them. "It's a big world with a lot of people in pain. If we can ease a fraction of that, it's worth it." Alexander brushed a light kiss against her temple, a tender gesture that left her breath hitching. "Then let's do it together." Surrounded by artworks that dared to turn chaos into beauty, they let the moment settle, hearts aligned on a shared path forward. No longer encumbered by secrets, they felt free to imagine a future where their love and their commitment to helping others was the foundation of something truly extraordinary. Back at the hospital a few days later, Grace paced a small lecture hall, adjusting the microphone and scanning the seats. She'd been asked, somewhat at the last minute, to give a talk on the importance of philanthropic partnerships in pediatrics. On the surface, it was just another speaking engagement. But deep inside, she recognized it as a critical moment to blend her personal story with her professional mission, finally in full honesty. A handful of medical residents and community members filtered in, as well as a few donors from smaller charities. Elizabeth Harding sat in the front row, jotting notes and occasionally giving Grace an encouraging nod. Grace's sister, Lily, slipped in quietly with a warm smile. And standing discreetly at the back of the room was Alexander Morgan. When it was time to begin, Grace cleared her throat, feeling her pulse race. "Good evening, everyone," she started. "I'm Dr. Grace Sullivan. Thank you for coming." She clicked through a few slides, graphs illustrating the disparity in pediatric funding, photos of smiling children, former patients who'd overcome harrowing illnesses. The crowd seemed engaged but subdued, as though waiting for something more. Grace inhaled. "Tonight, I want to share not just statistics, but a personal story. 15 years ago, my sister Lily almost died from a failing liver. My parents and I were helpless until an anonymous donation paid for her transplant surgery. That donation came from the Morgan Institute, though we didn't discover that until much later." She paused, the confession ringing clearly in the small space. A few heads tilted with intrigue, and Lily looked on with tears shining in her eyes. At the back, Alexander stood utterly still, his attention rapt. "It changed our lives," Grace continued softly. "It inspired me to become a pediatrician, because I learned, in the most personal way, how a single act of generosity can ripple outward, touching not just one life, but an entire family, an entire community." An attentive hush settled over the audience. One or two sniffles indicated that her words had struck an emotional chord. Grace steeled herself for the next part. I never expected to meet anyone from the Morgan Institute, but fate has a way of surprising us. And when I did meet Mr. Alexander Morgan, I hesitated to reveal our connection out of fear of being misunderstood, fear of jeopardizing our hospital's future or our personal bond. But the biggest lesson I've learned is that secrecy only spawns confusion, whereas honesty fosters true partnership. Somewhere near the front, Elizabeth gave her a small, approving smile. In the back, Alexander's expression softened, eyes reflecting a quiet pride. She ended her talk with practical steps, how hospitals and philanthropic donors can build sustainable relationships, the importance of transparency, and the transformative power of kindness. When she clicked off the final slide, the room erupted in applause, polite but genuine. Afterward, a cluster of attendees approached Grace to express appreciation for her candor. She chatted briefly with the medical residents who asked about applying philanthropic strategies to smaller clinics. Lily slipped up to her, enveloping her in a heartfelt hug. "You did amazing," Lily whispered. "I'm so proud of you." As the crowd thinned, Alexander made his way forward. The memory of her last speech haunted her, back when Donovan's suspicions were at their peak. But this was different. This time, she had nothing left to hide. "You were remarkable," he said, voice quiet yet brimming with admiration. "It's not easy to bare your soul like that." Grace exhaled, feeling the shaky after-effects of public vulnerability. It was time. "I wanted people to understand that donations aren't just numbers, they can be personal lifelines." He nodded. "I've had countless philanthropic endeavors under my belt, but hearing a story like yours drives home the real impact. You were right. We can change lives when we stop operating behind thick walls." One of the smaller charity donors, a woman with salt and pepper hair, approached them tentatively. "Dr. Sullivan, Mr. Morgan, I just wanted to say how inspiring this was. I run a local fund for pediatric nutrition, and I'd love to explore a collaboration if you're open to it." Alexander exchanged a glance with Grace, a knowing smile passing between them. "We'd be happy to talk," he replied, offering the woman a business card. Once she left, Grace couldn't resist a light laugh of disbelief. "I guess I'm not the only one who found it all inspiring." Alexander's gaze softened. "It seems you've turned your personal journey into a beacon for others, and I'd like to stand by you in that, if you'll have me." Taking his hand, Grace felt a surge of gratitude. "I wouldn't want it any other way." Their hands entwined, they left the lecture hall together. Though the weight of the past still lingered in memory, they were free to share the light of a renewed purpose. A vision for a future where open hearts and open communication could redefine what philanthropy really meant. And in that shared pursuit, they discovered that vulnerability could be the very thing that made them strongest. A crisp autumn wind swept through Martha's vineyard, stirring the golden leaves across the estate's expansive lawn. For months, Grace had wondered if she'd ever set foot here again, recalling her first visit. How out of place she'd felt in Alexander's luxurious world. Yet now, as she stepped onto the veranda by his side, she was struck by a sense of familiarity, almost belonging. He led her inside the house, where a crackling fireplace offset the chill outside. The place looked more inviting than ever, personal touches in the decor, framed photographs on tables, and a cozy warmth that came from the knowledge that it wasn't just a grand property, it was a home he wanted to share with her. "I remember feeling so uneasy here," Grace admitted, running her fingers along the back of a soft armchair. "It felt like an alien world. Now it feels different." Alexander stood beside her. "Because it's not a fortress anymore. I used to retreat here, hide from real connections, Meeting you changed that." She turned, heart fluttering at the sincerity in his voice. "It changed everything for me, too." In the days following her lecture, they'd begun forging a deeper partnership, one that extended beyond the hospital. Alexander often stopped by after her shifts, and she accompanied him to charitable events where they openly shared their story of how a single donation had connected their lives in unforeseen ways. Donovan, while not entirely apologetic, had gradually relented his campaign against Grace once the audit confirmed her integrity. Tensions between uncle and nephew mellowed into an uneasy truce. Tonight, however, was not about social appearances or hospital obligations. It was about them. Grace had packed a small bag for the weekend, ready to spend time away from the relentless pace of Boston. More importantly, she wanted to see if they could truly knit their lives together, not as billionaire and pediatrician, but as two people who had weathered a storm of secrets and come out stronger. They settled around a rustic dining table, sharing a simple dinner of grilled fish and roasted vegetables prepared by the estate's caretaker. Soft laughter punctuated their conversation, interspersed with comfortable silence that felt like a testament to how far they'd come. Afterward, they wandered outside, arm in arm, under a vast canopy of stars. The moon cast a silver path across the water, and the hush of the evening invited heartfelt confessions. "I've been thinking about expanding the Morgan Institute's pediatric fund even further," Alexander said, voice hushed but resolute. "Not just with donations, but by creating a fellowship program for doctors who want to specialize in underserved areas. You inspired that." Grace's eyes glowed. "That's incredible. We need more well-trained pediatricians in rural or low-income communities. The difference it could make is huge." He let out a gentle laugh. "You see, this is what I mean. Your passion pushes me to dream bigger. I'm grateful." She leaned against him. "I've been speaking to Lily, too. She's considering volunteering abroad for a few months, helping children in remote clinics. She wants to honor that second chance she was given, just like I do." They reached a set of weathered wooden chairs near the shoreline and sat, gazing at the shimmering waves. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle rhythm of the ocean. Alexander turned, taking her hands gently in his. "Grace, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." He hesitated, warmth glowing in his eyes. "We've been through a lot. Misunderstandings, secrets, suspicion, and finally honesty. I've never felt so connected to anyone in my life. I don't want us to just be a chapter. I want this to be the whole story." Her heart pounded in her chest. She saw the question forming in his expression, and an exhilarating mixture of anticipation and joy spread through her. He drew in a breath. "Will you consider sharing this home, this life, with me permanently? I know it's sudden, and I won't rush you, but if you can see yourself building a future here, with me, I'd be the luckiest man alive." Tears brimmed in her eyes, a swirl of emotions making her chest ache in the best way possible. She thought of all the moments that had led them here. The first meeting at the wedding, the hospital wards, the fear she'd carried about revealing Lily's story. And now, that fear had transformed into a breathtaking new horizon. "Yes," she whispered, voice shaking. "I want that too, Alexander. I want to be by your side, wherever this journey takes us." A wave of relief and happiness washed over his face. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to hers. Neither needed words in that moment. The unspoken vow in their silence said enough. They stayed there on the beach, fingers interlaced, hearts buoyed by the acceptance and hope that had once seemed so elusive. The stars shimmered overhead, as if applauding their decision. Tomorrow would bring new obligations, new challenges, both in philanthropy and in medicine. But for now, in this pocket of time, they found serenity and promise in each other's arms. And so, the winding road that had begun with a single anonymous donation reached an extraordinary intersection of love, forgiveness, and shared purpose. Their story, once mired by secrecy, was now woven with trust and devotion. At last, Grace felt a profound sense of homecoming, realizing that home was not just a place. It was the person she'd chosen, and who had chosen her in return. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.